Welcome to the Good Old Blades podcast. I am your host, Aaron Livin, and join me as we talk to other knife makers and craftsmen about anything and everything knives. Within the multitude of knife makers, there is a split between fixed blade and folders. And within folders, many more splits, each filling a niche. It's the nature of knives and the niche within niche within niche that stratifies the world of a knife maker. Countless paths and rabbit holes to occupy even the flightiest of fellows. Inside of slip joints, there may be many makers, but the rise of a few golden boys has caught my attention over the years, and Evan Nicolaides is definitely one of them. In his journey to conquer the mighty slip joint mechanism, I have witnessed his toils, and Evan is definitely one of those makers that prefers to do it the hard way first, and then find ways to bring the superb into the sublime and combine efficiencies. In the pursuit to cut no corners, Evan has solidified himself as a top-tier knife maker, and his recreation work in Sheffield-era slip joints has pushed the envelope on resurrecting some of the most stunning examples of cutlery to ever exist. There may not be many makers out there like Evan doing what he does, but he's a wealth of knowledge and a proponent of continuing the legacy of bringing back old school cool in his journey in knives. Evan, it's great to have you on the Good Old Blades podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, man.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's great to finally have an opportunity to talk with you. We've kind of done this little chasing back and forth for almost a year now. I think that I talked to you sometime last year after I kind of stabilized things with the podcast, and I knew that was I was going to continue with it and everything. And so I wanted to talk to you a lot because there's things that you're doing inside of knives that is not really so common, and whether it's your Sheffield reproduction work, I guess you might call it, and some of the techniques and things like that you do, to me, that just I want to get into why you decided to do that stuff, but also probably early on in my knife making journey in the 2016 era, I had seen videos of you, and I've followed your Instagram and whatnot. And so for me, I'm actually coming to this conversation as a little bit of a fanboy because not only is your technique and everything been inspiring, but what you have done within knives has just been something that's always made me think about ways that I can do things that, it's not a replica of you, but that there's a whole ton of techniques for making knives, and how do you as a maker choose what you do. And then it's made me be a little bit more introspective about things like, what is it that I really want to get out of knives, and what do I want to how do I want to use that medium to express myself. So first thank you for that, but I mean definitely a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thanks, man. That's actually something I've been really fascinated about for a while, kind of how personal the process is for each knife maker. Like, I always think of Tony and Reese. They're in the same shop. Reese learned everything from Tony, and they had their own tools in there, and they would do things totally differently. It's how it works with your personality, how it works with you. There isn't a set way to do everything. There's tons of different ways to do many things, especially when it comes to folding knives. There's so many different aspects of them, and it really is kind of like a personal process. And I love picking guys' brains about how they do different things and trying different stuff out all the time, seeing what works for me. If I like something, I'll adopt it. If not, it was worth a try, right? See if I could make something a little bit easier for myself, or if I like it more. But yeah, it's kind of cool that to hear that you saw some of those old videos and tutorials and stuff. But yeah, man.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think in some ways, uh, knife makers in social media that share their behind the scenes process, you don't really realize how much of like the blind leading the blind it is. But I mean, I
Yeah,
definitely knew that there was things that you were trying out for the first time. But then I was like, like that's pretty cool. Like as you're learning things, I'm also like ingesting that and trying to figure out how does that apply to me. And what kind of ideas does it spark? So I mean, like when you see somebody who's innovating, that becomes intriguing, especially if you're kind of one of those people that likes to do like to do things that are a little bit outside of the box. So that's kind of the thing to me. Like I think that it's definitely a point where when we kind of commit and invest in the community, as it were, and just kind of share behind the scenes.
mhm.
It's a lot different than back in the day when everything was like, quote unquote proprietary and people were hiding techniques or giving false information because they just wanted to, stamp out competition.
Yeah. And I mean, the internet's totally changed it too. I remember when I started, there wasn't nearly the amount of information out there on how to make knives, how to do you know, different things. I think two two things that helped me out were uh, I found two books on making slip joints. Um, one of them is how to make a multi-blade folder, and I forget the other one. I think the title of the book was Making Slip Joints My Way.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, now there's like the Making Slip Joints Facebook group. There's tons and tons of information in there. It's so much easier to get a hold of people and just pick their brains about stuff. When when I started, I couldn't find any of this information, uh, so I was kind of trying to figure it out on my own for at least the first couple years. I started out modifying knives, so that's where I began, and that was just completely, you know, I barely knew how to use tools before I got into that. I'd always been artistic. I liked working with my hands. Clearly I still do. But I was looking for a hobby, and then my buddy turned me on to Great Eastern cutlery knives, and I fell in love. And then I started dabbling in collecting, and went on eBay and bought this old Barlow. And when it got to me, I didn't realize it had shell handles on it, so they were hollow plastic handles. I was like, these have to go. So I just like, you know what? I'm going to try to make my own handles. Did that. I had a lot of fun. Started getting involved in blade forums and posted a picture of it. People really liked it. And, I was like, hey, maybe this will be a fun hobby, right? Got some case knives, did the same thing. Next thing you know, people want to buy them. And then I'm buying up Great Eastern cutlery knives like crazy and modifying them. And I did that for a couple years, I want to say. Uh, Burned through a lot of uh, Night Bright GC 15s, a lot of them, because they were the cheapest ones out, right? I think I was getting for like $50 at the time. Like I'm talking like 2013. You see one of those things on eBay now, they're like $200. But yeah, I whittled down those numbers, the production numbers on those.
Yeah.
But it got to the point where, I wasn't just gluing down new handles and keeping the original bolsters. I was making the liners, soldering bolsters on, doing mill reliefs on the liners to keep the tanks from getting scratched up. I was basically doing everything but making the blades and the springs. So I took that plunge in, I want to say, December of 2014. Yeah. And then I went to Blade in 2015. I exhibited. I'd never met another slip joint maker. they stuck me in the back corner, and uh, I didn't even really explore all that much. It was so overwhelming. I had no idea what I was getting into, but I loved it, and kept going. And I still had a full time job at that point, so it was still a hobby, but kept working at it. Reinvesting everything I made back into my shop to get better tools. Stop grinding on a 1x30 Harbor Freight grinder, um, and building it up, and then kind of went from there.
Yeah. Well, that's a lot of growth from your early days of knife modification. But I don't see a lot of people that would go as deeply into modifying GEC knives as you have. Similarly, Jason Ritchie got into modifying knives before he started making his own slip joints too, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I was talking to him about that, and he told me, he's like, "Man, I watched all the tutorials you put on blade forms on how to do this stuff, and like that totally got me into it." And I was like, "Dude, that's so cool to hear." So I'm glad that the information I was putting out there helped somebody, because it wasn't there when I was doing it. And um, yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun, and then it was a while before I saw, somebody that got to spend time with another knife maker. And I mean, that was a, a big change after that. And I forget exactly what it was. I want to say um, either November of or December of 2016. I went and saw Tony and Reese. My in-laws were living in Carmel, Indiana. It was about, let's say, like an hour and a half, 2 hours away from Shelburne. And I'd called Tony up before, just out of the blue. He's like, "Yeah, I know where you are. Come on over." And I was like, "Oh, what? Why do you know who I am?" Uh, little did I know, Tony was, poking around blade forms, and he, was watching what people were doing, paying attention. And after that, it was like I'd never handled a quality custom slip joint up until that point, and it just blew my mind. I was like, okay, this is what they're supposed to look like. Now I know what I need to do. Because up to that point, it was pretty much production stuff, right? So, Great Eastern Cutlery, uh, uh, that was, pretty much the gold standard for production. And that, uh, so that was a change. And just the first time I hung out in the shop with him, learned a lot. And but I think the biggest thing was opening my eyes up to what they could be in terms of precision, how clean the work was, how beautiful everything was, and something to strive for. So that was, set me off on a different trajectory.
Oh yeah. Um yeah, my early experience in like custom slip joints, I had gone to it was right before COVID. I think it was the last show that they did, but they had a group with 100%ers, and and if I remember correctly, the two people that I saw were Johnny Stout with liner locks and Tom Overinder. And I got to mess with a few of his multi-blade slip joints, and I was like, oh man, like at that point, I was making like mostly cutlery stuff. It was more of what I knew, hunting blades, all fixed stuff, and I was getting into the mechanisms for slip joints. And that show, even though it was like a micro show, really it changed. It changed. I think the perspective that I have on going out and actually feeling and manipulating, quality work. It's one of the reasons why I do like
Yeah.
shows, is because you get to be, coon finger a bunch of phenomenal makers, and they're more than happy to share knowledge and give you that tactile experience, and it really
Yeah.
changes it, because before that I don't think my hands knew what like high quality really felt like. Yeah,
Yeah. Exactly.
and the
Exactly.
machining. I mean, Tommy is just like a phenomenal machinist, and
Oh yeah.
so, like, for me, it was like everything was perfect, and it didn't matter that he was using all rose gold pins and the nicest handle materials and everything. He could have like stripped it down to bare bones, and it would have been the most perfect mechanical knife out there. He just does a phenomenal job.
Yeah, he does. But yeah, that change once you get to handle that, see the fit and finish, how tight everything is, how perfect everything is, how buttery smooth the action is. It's mind blowing. Um, and I mean that's part of the reason I love going to shows too. It's an inspiration every time I meet somebody new, see some work from a maker I hadn't met yet, get to handle it, and it's inspiring. It's really cool. I
Yeah.
love shows, man.
Well,
I love them.
I mean, it's something that you perpetuate too with your making, is getting your work out there, taking those experiences with fit and finish and the tactile mechanical nature of things, and then just like allowing it to proliferate. And that to me is cool. Everybody should do that. Like, even if shows are not the most regular thing for a maker, they should at least go to them fairly regularly. And if they have the opportunity to exhibit and get that customer feedback, and be in the room with some of those people,
Hmm.
I really enjoy it. It's one of the unfortunate parts about the economy and everything, is that shows are way more expensive in comparison to kind of the sales and things like that you get most of the time. So
Yeah,
it's like it's always an investment in quote unquote marketing, but that's the way I have to feel about it. Otherwise, I'm like, dude, this is like totally
it
not
is.
worth it.
It really is. I know. And I used to have the position that the shows weren't worth it. I'd go to Blade Show, um, and that was kind of a vacation. You know what I mean? Get to hang out with people from the community, but I didn't see it as worth it on a business side. Uh, but it's really important. Uh, People want to see you. They want to meet you. They want to see who's behind the work. Uh, and at the same time, like if you sell a knife online, right? Say it trades hands with five people. That's five people that got to handle that knife. At a show, you could have 100 people handle that knife, and they'll get to experience it and see your work. Uh, a picture on Instagram could only do so much, right? Um, I, I, I'm sure you have seen this as well. That something will look great in the picture, and then you see it in person, and you're like, oof. Uh, that could use work here. Half of it's the action, right? You've got to be able to uh, to feel that in person to be able to judge it. Um, so that's something that's really important with the shows, and it's the community aspect of it
Yeah.
as well. Hanging out with other makers, it's great.
Yeah, and I think for newer slip joint makers, well, I mean, I guess it can really apply to folders in general, but especially slip joints. There's To me, I almost, if I close my eyes and I feel a slip joint and its mechanism, that's really kind of where like where it talks to me, right? And it's
Mhm.
does it sound right? Does it feel right in its positions? Does it feel good on the tips of the fingers? Does it fit well in the palm? Is the weight distribution right? I mean, and I know that it's like a pocket knife that weighs almost nothing compared to fixed blades, but um, the thing is like if I'm opening a knife and I feel it crunchy in one of the positions, I'm like, okay, like these are areas that need to be worked on, because the idea is that it should be a sound mechanism first, and
Mhm.
having crunchy action um, is something where there's a fundamental, I guess, misunderstanding or lack of appropriate attention put on tang geometry and the interplay
Mhm.
between hardnesses of the spring and the tang surfaces and things like that. And there's like a multitude of ways to fix those things, but a maker should really be concerned with fit and finish and mechanical principles first, if they're going to try to make a really solid slip joint.
Yeah. I mean, you could have something that looks beautiful, right? But if it doesn't work, and then it doesn't work. And it's got to be a functioning knife first. Um, but the thing with slip joints that's kind of cool and extra challenging is once you've pinned that guy together, uh, there's only so many times you can take it apart before it's destroyed. You know what I mean? You've got a couple shots at taking it apart and putting it back together, and issues crop up that you just don't know. Um, every knife that you make is a learning experience. Uh, so something will come up that hasn't happened before, and you've got to figure it out. It's a an endeavor in problem solving, um, and especially when we're talking about a pinned slip joint, uh, they can be very unforgiving. Uh, as I'm learning, as I've started with the modern folders now, there's a lot more of a forgiving aspect there. You can make adjustments here, adjustments there. Uh, you're working with screws. You can take it back apart. You can remake a part, and the other parts are still usable. With a slip joint, if you screw it up, you kind of got to throw it away. If it goes beyond the point of no return, or take it all the way back down to just the spring of the blade and rebuild the frame from scratch. It could, if it could come to a point where your spring tension gets too light, maybe your holes are just off enough to that your pin's going in at an angle and it's screwing up your centering, and uh yeah, it could be frustrating, but it is an endeavor in problem solving. They're challenging, but a lot of fun.
Yeah. Well, I'm reminded kind of like there's a lot of philosophical components to knife making, right? I've always just sat there and I probably think more about things when I'm making knives and kind of like um I don't know, like the meaning behind stuff. And it's one of those things where there's lots of things in life that are kind of like is it like life at conception? Not to like get political, but a knife,
Mm,
like a slip joint. When you peen it together, that's kind of when it gets its soul. When like samurai
yeah.
swords are being made, it's like during the quench, and when potters are
Mm,
making a pot, it's when it's fired. There's always these it's a paradigm shift where it goes from one thing to very clearly another thing, and there's like nothing you can do to go back. And even still, like piecing something together and then um having to break it apart because there was a mistake, really it diminishes the knife in some ways.
yeah.
And you got to decide, well, I mean, is it better just to wax it and start over, or is there ways that you can fix it? And not saying it's not irredeemable, but um, I've often thought about that. Like fixed blades, there's a lot of things that you can mess up on, and it doesn't really matter. I mean, if you pay attention to your fit and finish and like all those components, it really is it just is a fixed thing. but in
Mhm.
the mechanics of pocket knives, especially, there's a lot more that you have to think about, and everything kind of plays on each other. I mean, it's like, you know, Bill Ruppel is like talks a lot about doing things in the at the right time, right? Like don't do anything
Yeah.
that you don't have to until you have to, basically.
Yep.
And I've thought about that a lot, in my own knife making, even though I spend more time in the fixed blade realm. When you apply those concepts of, you have a process that you kind of figure out, and then you build your efficiencies in each process to make sure you don't do something too soon or rework things. Everything has its place, and don't do things too soon thinking that you're going to rush through a knife, when really you have to focus on one thing at a time, and build upon the success of the previous step.
Yep. Yeah. And there's you build your method, but it's constantly as you're trying to get better and improve your work, and it's you know always trying to shoot for perfection, always missing short, learning things on every build, picking up different techniques, and it's always evolving. It's an ever evolving process, especially with I mean it's what I make the most. It's what I can relate it to the most. Slip joints. There's so many things you can do, and just like Tony said, if if it's not challenging enough, add a blade, um, and things can just go sideways on you very quickly. Uh, Especially when you start adding a lot of blades and a lot of springs and tiny little parts, and you've got 40 pieces in front of you, and you've got to assemble this thing, and you've quadruple measured everything, and you go to pin it together and it all goes to shit. you you gotta work on your
Yeah.
patience.
That's kind of like raising children, and then you get down, like, the 18-year route or whatever, and they're not exactly the rounded adults you maybe thought that they would when they were like 3 or 4. You're like, where did I go wrong, and how do I fix this? Like, it's, well, I'm sorry, you have what you have. You've impressed upon them that what you can, and now you just kind of let them figure out how to work out the kinks themselves. Maybe sometimes therapy. But that's the thing, honestly, with your knife making journey, that has impressed me, is that you've been willing to tackle, um, concepts, very early into your knife making. So, like, I mean, even early 2017, you started, uh, uh, checkering bolster, or checkering the handle material, and doing things like that. Like, I mean, those are all things that a lot of people don't even tackle in their knife career. But you're sitting here, doing some of the best checkering work that, I've seen on knives.
Oh,
Period.
thanks,
Right.
man. Yeah, I mean, I actually started that when I was modifying, and I was looking at a knife, and I was like, man, it would be really cool if this bone was gun stock checkered. I was like, yeah, it can't be that hard. For me.
Famous last words.
I know. 8 hours later, working on the same piece of bone, I'm like, oh my God, what did I do to myself? But then when it comes together, that looks so cool, and it feels great in the hand. It's like, it it is a labor of love. Uh, I don't do it that often, but when I do, it is gratifying, and it's therapeutic too. You're kind of zen working there, carving your lines, uh, and it is, yeah, there is that therapeutic aspect to it, especially when it comes to that checkering.
Yeah, well, I mean, talk about compounding issues, right? So you have all these, like, the knife isn't even together yet, and then you decide, oh, hey, let me go ahead and and checker this really expensive piece of Westinghouse or mother of pearl or ivory or something like that. Let me just make it a little bit more difficult on myself so that way before I bang this thing together, I can totally fail at it.
I know. Let me just in case this wasn't hard enough, let me potentially screw it all
Yeah.
up.
That's the way I feel about working with Damascus sometimes. I mean, not that I've sat and made Damascus, but I mean, there's
Mm.
like I'm paying somebody to make Damascus, and I know that they've put a lot of their blood, sweat, and tears in. They're probably not charging nearly enough, and then I go to try to make something out of it, and I'm like, I could really screw this up right now. Like, it's not something you could just throw away and not shed a tear over.
It's like, oh, this knife is almost done. Let me dip it in acid.
Yeah, there's just any number of things that could go wrong. Well, I mean, look at your shield work too. Like early on, you're doing all freehand shield inlays. That's actually one of the um before I started uh going down the route of pantographs, which introduced me to Tim Robertson. I was
Mm.
looking for any resources for pantograph work and in shield inlays, and so I kind of started with parser plates, but I didn't really like the feel of that. I didn't, it just wasn't for me. And also, everybody pretty much that I was looking at that was doing parser plates, there was some level of issue with the fit, right? I mean, you could tell
Yeah.
after everything's been ground down and whatnot that there was like very clear gaps and lines and things, and that there was no real way to hide it. And I was like, that's not for me. Then this
Mm.
fool comes around and does it all freehand. I'm like, I can never do that. Like, like to me, it's not that I don't think that I might could find it in myself to technically do it. I could never tolerate the patience that it would take to do that. And I mean, I watched your video on the Apostle P, Rob Bixby, and dude,
Mm.
I was like, mad props. There's no way at all that I would encounter that and spend eons trying to learn technically how to do it and not screw it up and get the results that I wanted. So I spent a little bit of money with Tim, bought a pantograph, and I haven't looked back since.
I love my pantograph. I'll never go back. Never in a million years go back to that madness. But it was one of those things where I just didn't know better, right? I wanted to um, put a shield in, and I didn't have the tools to do it. I had a Dremel, and I could set it up in this jig and lower it to a depth. And I got some, small mill cutters, and you know what? Let me trace the shield on the handle and carve it out. Don't hit the
Yeah,
lines.
and well, and then having to go in by hand and remove material and stuff and fit it
Yeah.
all up. It's like, dude, like you're a glutton for punishment for sure because that's like
Oh yeah.
I would have just been like, I'm just gonna save the money and do it a different way. But you're just like, okay, well, I'm just gonna be bullheaded and do it live.
Yeah. But I got good at it. So and it was comfortable by the time, I switched over to the pantograph. I actually had my pantograph, and I hadn't set it up yet leading into Blade uh 22. First show I came back to after taking my break. And I was making a 5 blade Longhorn, which is my kind of version of a cattle knife. Most complicated knife I'd made up to that point, and I needed to cut a shield into some Westinghouse ivory paper. So I'm like, do I want to experiment on the pantograph on this, or just do it the way I know how to do it and get it done? So that just goes to show you how comfortable I was with it at that point. I wasn't willing to try something that I've come to find out is vastly easier, um, just to make sure that I did it right for this knife that I was building. Uh, you know, checkered Westinghouse ivory paper with a custom shield that I freehand cut in.
Yeah, plus the blades, all that stuff.
Yeah.
Well, and I think that, by doing it the hard way, it does give you the ability to appreciate what kind of tolerances you expect out of a pantograph, because a lot of people think that when you set up a pantograph that it all just runs magically, and you can encounter the same issues with gapping, the same issues with your fit,
Hmm.
everything. I mean, broken bits and moving parts and everything, and you can easily destroy parts by putting things on a pantograph. Like, even so, I know, like, Tim has made like a lot of the templates that he uses himself, and I've seen that with a lot of the old timers. Tom Overinder does that, and when Chris Crawford started doing these 3D printed templates, I was like, "That's great. I don't want to have to hand build these things." However, when I started using his templates, I noticed that the PLA that is printed 3D printed or whatever, depending on what your infill is and everything, it kind of has a little bit of a give to it, right? And
Mm.
although it could be microscopic in some ways, if you push too hard on the perimeter of those templates, then you can actually skew how far the cutter goes into either the shield itself or the pocket that you create, and you can distort it.
Yep.
And there's lots of people that use, I mean, I say lots of people, I mean, in this niche market of knives, and then the niche market of using pantographs on slip joints or pocket knives, we're not really talking about a lot. But I've seen quite a few examples of shields being inlaid, and some of the fundamentals of the machinery not being understood, and so there is gapping, there is mirages of dirt and compound and things like that that occur in that, especially on
Mm.
expensive materials like mother of pearl, where it's really not very forgiving. And you don't if you
Yeah.
don't understand what it is you're looking for, then it becomes infinitely harder to get a machine to do that same thing. So in your mind's eye, you need to really be sure of what you're trying to achieve, and then you can kind of like augment a
Yeah.
pantograph to
Exactly.
do what you want it to. I think that's probably where you benefit in a lot of ways, because you did it the hard way, and then you're like, oh, a pantograph, like, properly set up, and if I can get it to do these things, test, 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 and yeah, bang, like I've done it in a fraction of the time that it would take to hand inlay it. However, I mean, but you have to have that the experience of like what could go wrong in order to augment your tooling to make sure that you get the results that you want. I mean, it's super tight work. Like, you can't tell the difference in terms of the fit, but to know that you did that all by hand before magnifies how much expertise and thought process goes into doing it the hard way.
Yeah, and it kind of sets an expectation, right? Um, Doing it probably the most difficult way possible without, unless you're chiseling the whole thing out by hand. Um, you have to be patient and lay everything out exactly. Uh, you know, make sure that your shield is centered exactly where you want. Um, I mean, I measure one point in the frame and another point in the frame, draw my center line, and it takes time setting it up on the pantograph and making tiny little minor adjustments to make sure that my shield is perfectly dead center. And then, you've got to consider uh, where, you still have to grind the frame a little bit after that. When you pin it together, things shift around a little bit. And then you've got to clean up the spine. So you're going to lose a little bit of meat on that side. And where if you've got scale pins, if that pin's off and your shield's straight, it's going to look off. So you've got to, there's steps that lead into it, uh, that to make it look right in the end, you have to start early on with it. So there's a lot of thought that goes into it. And I did, that's when I had that pantograph graph in the shop and I didn't use it, it was coming up on Blade Show time, and I knew that I wanted to take my time and learn the machine, learn how I wanted to set it up for myself, work out all the kinks, and get my process dialed in there. Do that, initial legwork to set myself up for success in the future. So make it a very repeatable, streamlined process down the line. But that, it takes a lot of patience and forethought and planning out. And I think you're right that doing it the more difficult way initially that I taught myself how to do kind of laid the groundwork for my methods and how I approach things now.
Yeah, but isn't that true of like your entire experience in knives? I mean, so you're modifying knives, started making knives, took a sabbatical from making knives, and then you come back to it, and you're like, you're in a different zone now than I think that you ever were. But you have to do things the hard
Yeah.
way. You have to figure out, maybe take a little bit of a break and say, what do I want to do when I grow up? Is it still this thing? And that's to me a lot of the philosophy of knives, like where it kind of like interplays with our human desires, is that um, sometimes you need a break to gain perspective, and that's what I do. Like
Mm.
sometimes I have to take some time out of what I'm doing to get out of my own way and just allow things to progress, and figure out, am I still doing it for the right reasons? Am I still finding joy in it? And you're an example of that with kind of what you're doing with your production work, and all of these crazy Sheffield builds and stuff like that. I mean, to me, you're just in a different zone now that I don't know if you would have been if you didn't do it the hard way.
Yeah. And at the same time, taking a couple of years off and then coming back, uh, approaching it from a completely different perspective, different, position in my life, a lot more comfortable and in a lot more of a stable time in my life. And it let me uh, approach it all differently. And I kind of shook off all of the uh, previous. So I was holding on to a lot of things. Just I don't know if it was out of stubbornness or what, but I would refuse to do certain things on my knives. I wanted to stick with, uh, kind of stay in that traditional box. And I was pushing it a little bit. I'd come up with some new designs, but there were still aspects that I didn't want to step out of. Uh, and when I came back from taking a couple of years off, I kind of just didn't care anymore. I was like, who cares about that? I just want to make what I want to make, and I'm gonna have fun with it. And I don't really care if nobody else likes it. You know what I mean? And luckily, that it's been my best work, and people have liked that the most. So now the only knives that aren't my design that I make are Sheffield exhibition knives, and they're extremely complicated. And I've started designing my own spins on those now too, and that's just a lot of fun. Uh, I've I I remember the first time I saw that Sheffield exhibition book, it blew my mind. Have you seen
Oh
that book?
yeah, yeah, it's pretty incredible.
Oh my gosh, I don't, it's incredible to think that they were making those knives, grinding blades on water wheels by by
Yeah.
candlelight. It's insane. Yeah, I mean, there are a handful of people on Earth today that could do that, and with the machinery that we have today, yeah, I mean, there's still a couple of guys doing it the old school Sheffield way, using those old tools, which is incredible. Um, but it really that really puts things in perspective as well. There's so much history behind these things, and when you see something like that, where uh, there's a a multi-blade folding knife with a mechanical pencil in it, scissors, a saw, it packed into this tiny little package, uh, made with super basic stuff. Uh, you know, it puts things in perspective,
Yeah,
for
yeah,
yourself. It's like, man, they're people have been making these things and doing it in an incredible job for centuries. And, I'm just scratching the surface a little bit. Uh, and just seeing how much of a challenge it is, it really makes you appreciate the history behind it.
yeah. And a few things that I've really liked. Well, so the Catch Bit show has always been a fan favorite of mine. I've had Neil Punchard on to talk, history of knives and things like that, and he's also, yeah, we're
Yeah,
just,
he's great.
we talk every once in a while. It's been a while so far. Well, it's the last year sometime, but I really appreciated what they were doing on the Catchbit show because it gave me a different perspective and appreciation for um, just how crazy and sometimes novel the knives that ended up surviving have been, right? And I had
Hmm.
Grace Horn on, and she was talking about. She said there was an instance where the grinders and the Smiths, I guess, got into a feud, and so the Smiths or whatever put gunpowder in the emery wheels of the grinders, and then there ended up being an explosion. I think like 6 or 8 people died from it.
Oh my
And
gosh.
to think, you have this entire culture of knives in Sheffield and everything, and you have all of this stuff happening, and then you still have all the workplace politics and stuff. We were talking about like the schisms in the guild and different pettiness in knives, and it's never gotten as bad as murder for sure. And you kind of have to put that in perspective. It's like what were these people dealing with at the same time that they were making these what we now consider works of art, and all of these different configurations and things like I know that they were talking about when you're doing these replications on these old knife patterns and stuff, you really only have catalogs to go off of, which have images on
Mm.
them, and the images are deceptive in some ways because what you see on the image is might be an artistic rendition of a knife that's pretty close to it, but non-functional if you think about the geometry. So, as a knife maker, you want to
Mm.
replicate that stuff, and you don't have an actual example of the piece. You have to do a lot of thinking about, how everything's supposed to go together. I can't imagine trying to take something that you don't actually have an example that you can take apart and to just go off of images and try to kind of make it ish the way that it's supposed to work. To me, all of that the I can't even really say it's reproduction at that point. It really is a modern um, um, a modern reimagining of a traditional
Yeah.
a traditional slip joint or whatever. To me, it's like I don't know if I'd ever be the kind of caliber of maker that would be able to do that.
Well, it takes a certain level of crazy, but it is like a modern rendition of it, right? Because there is a lot of guesswork. Some of them now, I've seen the guts of knives that aren't the same knife that I'm making, but that I can apply certain mechanisms to, like different Y-shaped springs and uh, fork springs and Z-shaped springs that'll work for certain things, and uh, but getting certain tolerances right, uh, getting things to fit together right. That I have to redesign it kind of from scratch. So if I have a catalog picture, I can upload it into my design program. So then I just have the profile of an opened knife, and I've got where I see how many pins are in it, right? Um, so okay, I've got a starting point, but then I've got to build everything inside and make sure everything fits. And sometimes I don't even have multiple pictures of it. Uh, so it's like you've got two pictures of this knife. You see what the parts are. Sometimes not all the blades are open. They're in the description. So it's like, okay, this is the only place that can be. So that adds another element. It's like, man, all right. So, but that's a lot of the fun of it too. Um, there's so I, one of them that I built based out of that book was well, it was a three-layer sportsman that I made, and it was actually kind of a combination of a couple that were on a page in the book. There's like five or six of them in there. And I took aspects from a few of them, kind of combined it into my ideal sportsman for that specific pattern. The size, the blade combinations, and the features on it. This was one that had um, checkered ivory handles. I used checkered ivory Westinghouse paper handles. Uh, so that was even something else that I could apply out of my, kind of wheelhouse of techniques to that to just give it a extra little bit of, me to it. But I was, that there was still a lot of guesswork to be done. Uh, but I was able to find a sportsman on eBay for pretty cheap. Uh, and when I got it, I immediately understood the how it worked just by seeing how the spring sat. I didn't take it apart, still have it in my drawer. Uh, so that was like, man, this would be so much easier if I had these. And the knife that I'm making for Atlanta, or I'm attempting to make for Atlanta, I've been staring at this thing in the book for about 2 years, knowing that I'm planning on making it for this show. And I just had no idea how it worked. I was like, okay, I'm thinking through it. Like, okay, normally it would work like this, but then there's this extra element. So that completely disables that mechanism. So there's got to be something else that works in there. And then I found these pictures of one of the knives in the book. I think it's on Gunbroker, and it showed a picture down into the blade well. And I was like, oh, okay. So that lets me figure out a little bit more, just another little piece of the puzzle. And then when I was in Texas, Paul Farina hands me this bag of Sheffield knives, and he's like, just sort through that. And I'm going through it, and I pulled this knife out. I'm like, oh man, so cool. This big old knife. And I'm turning it around in my hand, and I'm like, oh, sweet. And then there's one little aspect of it. It's got a pair of scissors under the scale. And when I saw that, it clicked in my head. I was like, I'm holding the knife. I'm holding the knife that I'm planning on building in a couple months. Like, oh my God, I'm never gonna have you know, I just got so excited about it. And I was like, Paul, please let me bring this home with me. And he's like, yeah, just give it back to me in Atlanta. And I'm like, oh my God, this makes my life so much easier.
Yeah.
But, uh, and then just seeing this and little details and aspects of what they put into this knife that you just don't see nowadays. So it's a multi-blade with a lock back, right? And it's 3 layers on the back half, and then the lock bar and the main blade, right? On the as the main yeah, as the main blade. But the 3 layers run parallel, and then the lock bar tapers down. And They just squeezed this thing together. So it goes from about zero point 0.3 to zero point 0.2 of an inch in about 2 inches. And it's got this piece has a 5 inch piece of stag, and the last 2 inches of the knife, it tapers down a tenth of an inch, but they just squeezed it. There, that's not carved into it. I don't know what method they used. I know they used to flatten stag, but it's just something you don't see anymore. This large, nice piece of stag, and it's just, you know, tapered and squeezed in the middle of the knife. And it's like, how do you do that?
Yeah. Well, I
It's
mean,
like,
I, I can only imagine that it was just a product of the time and necessity, right? Like, I mean, it's hard. Neil could probably speak more of this, or Grace, about some of the build specifications and things. I know that Grace has talked about uh, it's like the schematics, or draftings and things like that for dimensions, that they would use shorthand and stuff too, so you have to decipher what exactly all those things mean. But I had bought this old Henkel sleeve board whittler. Basically, it was very small. It's the only
mhm.
example I found of it, and I took it apart because I really wanted to understand exactly why they did it the way that they did. So, I mean, it wasn't super expensive, but now I kind of regret breaking it apart. But the the what they did with the springs is they tapered the springs. Like they forged a taper into the springs in order to be able to get the dimensions that they were looking for from front to back.
Hmm.
And they did it on very, very small blades. Like, I mean, this thing is like a miniature sleeve board, and one day I'll make it. Like, I'm working on getting a pattern and everything like that off of it. But it's
Hmm.
crazy to think, like how flippantly they address certain problems. They're just like, like a master cutler is probably just like, okay, well, this is just baked into the design. We're going to have to do this thing. The forgers did it, the grinders did their thing, and then collectively it got put together, and it worked, right? And
It's nuts. It's like, yeah, just beat that side of the spring a little harder than the other. That looks good. All right, slap it together. Let's go. It's like, how did you do this? And they forged all these parts. I mean, we're working with stock removal and mills and bandsaws and drill presses and grinders. They're just forging these things, forging the tangs on these knives, and they're still working today. Incredibly well. It's mind blowing.
yeah. Well, I mean, and I think too, like if we think about the price point and everything they're doing it for, I mean, those knives were not like incredibly expensive, some of them, but they still had the same quality of fit and finish, and a lot of like really what we would consider techniques that um, if you did it in a small shop today, it would take so much time. Like it's almost to the point where it makes it uneconomical to make it. Yet they did it in a production setting, and everybody kind of just went along with it. And we get to kind
Yeah.
of be historians and archaeologist, to a certain extent, to be able to take these things and to at least figure them out and understand it. And I think it takes a lot of want to research this stuff and try to connect the dots on why these things are important. But I have a lot of
Mm,
respect and a lot of appreciation for knife making in Sheffield and early knife making in the United States, and kind of how all of that sprung up and kind of where we're at today. I mean, a perfect example is jigging bone, like the K-bar roofline stuff. I mean, I have not seen really any examples of anyone else demonstrating how to do that, yet you have done that and showed everybody how to think about it. you know and that's
mm,
something that I know that there was an example of a customer and good friend of Tony's that shared pictures that he shared with him on how to do roof line, but it just, even the pictures, it doesn't do justice to like how difficult it is to think about the geometry of it, and then how to jig it appropriately and then get it into that final form that looks the way that it should.
Mm. Yeah, it's tricky. Um, and to get that ridge, there's a lot there's that was a fun endeavor because I messed around with different jigging techniques and getting different patterns down and trying new stuff, but having that ridge that then flows into a nicely curved bolster adds that different element. And then lining all those notches up properly, having them look uniform, it really adds just an extra little something to it that you don't see very often. Uh, that's my favorite chicken. I love that stuff. And that was inspired truly by Tony. When I saw that on a knife of his, I was like, man, that's cool. That is so cool. I got to go home and do that.
Well, yeah, I mean, and then to think about like, I mean, it's same way that you're doing shield inlays by hand. The people who are doing the jigging and everything probably just did it all freehand and by eye. They did it so many, tens of thousands of times that it just became
Mhm.
second nature to them. But to get that replicated, I mean, there's a lot of layout that's required to get it right and to make it look the way that it should look.
Yeah. Um, the more you do it, like when I first started doing, I was drawing lines and mapping everything out. Now it's just kind of, all right, let me wing it. And let's see. I've kind of gotten used to how to do it and how it's going to fit together. Um, and the lines kind of they're only helpful to a point because as you're jigging it, bone dust is covering them constantly. So you can only see them for so much unless you take the time and have to wipe it every time before you jig the next notch and paying attention to stuff. So there is like a muscle memory to it. And I'm sure if your job is to jig bone and that's all you do every day and you've been doing it for 10 years, you're probably pretty good at doing it fast. Especially, yeah, exactly like how inexpensive those knives were, um, and just how nice they came out. They were all masters at their crafts. At each individual job that they had, they were absolute masters at it. And that helps when you've got a team of masters working on a really complicated knife. That's like something that you don't see today. That doesn't exist to my knowledge.
Yeah. Well, and we're also kind of in this. Um, we're in like an artistic era where sole authorship is very heavily valued over teamwork, and so I
Mhm.
mean, you kind of miss out on some of that. But I mean, even still, if I want to take really great handle material from one maker and something like really great Damascus from another maker and everything, the cost of combining that all together is uneconomical for producing something and then selling it too. I mean think about it. If you were
Mhm.
to do Damascus on all of your blades and then to have some really crazy handle materials, not only rare, but then there's something really crazy technique wise that's being done with it. I mean, you have thousands of dollars in just the cost of the blade, and then to try to sell that and everything to recoup um, somewhat of the material, let alone the time. To me, is like it's pretty difficult. So I mean, it really comes down to doing things and exploring things out of the love of it more than the actual monetary,
Mhm.
value of things that you can get out of it.
Yeah. But that adds value to it in and of itself, right? Because it's reflected in your work, right? Your passion for it. the time you spent attempting to perfect it, it shows. So that, and that just kind of, when people recognize that in the work, it does add value. And I think that is part of that, um, where that sole authorship is sought after. It's just like, if you're making your own Damascus and you're doing every little step on this complicated folding knife or whatever, the amount of knowledge that you have to have and experience to lead to that point, there's value in that, even though, uh, you might be able to build a knife quickly. There's years and years leading up to that point.
Yeah. Well, and something. I mean, I work in IT, cybersecurity stuff, everything like that. I build businesses. I've been part of like um, startups for forever, really. And one of the things that's talked about very regularly in the startup culture of business is value proposition, right? Like, how do
Mm,
you quantify the value of something when people don't just like when it's not intrinsic, right? How do you convince
yeah.
somebody that something is worth their time and their money and to use? And so ideas, oftentimes, you evaluate those based on their value proposition, and it really gets kind of weird in the art world, because there's no way to really quantify the value of time. Like you and I, the things that we have in common is that, on our headstones there's a start date and an end date, right? And what we do
Yeah.
with that in between is really what differentiates us. It doesn't matter about a lot of other things, but what we do with that time. And time is something that you can't really quantify. So when I look at stuff like these really crazy builds and everything, I really I really think about the time that somebody put into it, because if that's the most valuable thing that you have and it is finite, what did a person produce? It's kind of one of the areas where, when I see somebody make like a knife shaped object or shanky type of knives or whatever, it's not that I respect them less, but I think that they could do a lot more. Like, I see the potential in people
Mm,
to, push beyond themselves and do something that it's interesting. But it's the same way with our lives. Like, I mean, you can be a crappy dad if you want to, or you can be the kind of dad that your kids, they don't want that end date to come too soon. They want they want to relish
mm,
you, and they are empowered by you and things. And it's the same way with like knives. Somebody who holds your knife, they want to look at your knife in their hand and say, this person really just hit these elements, and they think about it. And that's where I kind of think that we do have to evaluate the craft of knife making and everything as an art form, and evaluate things based on the time and energy and ideas that people are bringing to the table, because those to me are very interesting. Something that you slap ivory on and it looks really crappy, but it has, a $500 or $600 set of ivory on it. That doesn't make it more valuable to me. Stuff like you're doing, stuff where you really pushing the limits of what you personally can bring to the craft. That is very interesting, and that's why your knives are invaluable. Is because you're willing to invest something that really has no value. There's no way to quantify it.
don't make me blush over here. uh, no, I appreciate it. Yeah, I mean, yeah, I've always said that, the materials and kind of the flashiness or uh, is the last thing that I consider on a knife. I would rather see something basic with basic materials just executed very, very well over something that's sloppy with, $1,000 worth of material on it. that almost feels like a waste at times. You know what I mean? Um, like you're trying to run before you can walk. Uh, build off those fundamentals and work on the little things, and it shows. It shows in the work. And kind of going circling back to that. Um, you reminded me of what another aspect of doing this that I love so much, and it's I don't know how similar it is to other uh, knife making communities, but in slip joints in particular, makers are really tight and we help each other out as much as we can, sharing knowledge, building people up, and kind of uh, keeping the craft alive. And it's really encouraged to share what you've learned, share your techniques, help somebody that's starting out, and not hold back stuff to give yourself the advantage over your quote unquote competition. Yeah, we might be in competition, but we share with each other all the time. Like we want to kind of play on equal footing in this, and it's really cool. That's I really love the community around it.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I've seen it. Well, let me put it this way. I believe in that. I have also seen a lot of like the non-positive sides of knife making, where those, the gatekeeping happens and the discouragement and
Hmm.
everything. What I choose to promote is that, like, man, I cannot affect gatekeepers. I can't. Um, I can't make their minds up for them, but I won't do it.
Yeah.
It's a I don't want anybody to think that when I have guests on the podcast that I'm gatekeeping because, I'm not able to give everybody, the voice and the time and everything like that. Like, I don't like that. I mean, I grew up really poor and I was told that I'd be like, mountain trailer trash in the Appalachians and stuff. There's the kind of this expectation that you're really not supposed to expect a whole lot out of life because you're just, a dumb hillbilly. And I pushed really really hard off of that, and uh made a decision to separate myself from the mentality that I could not do. And so, pretty much everything that I do in life is a matter of saying, well, what is the voice inside of myself that says I can't do something? Give myself a little bit of grace and forgiveness, and then try to do that thing to prove myself wrong. It's really like I've kind of passed those people behind, that used to insinuate that I wasn't worth anything, and now have moved into a realm where I am my own worst critic. And
Hmm.
uh, I don't do gatekeeping. I try to be fair and equitable, but I also have a way that I think about things too. And I think it's important to give encouragement when it's appropriate and temper that. Like that's kind of one of the things like I've learned about some knife makers is, uh, there's obviously paying your dues that's important. But you pay your dues in the way that you experience making things and doing things, and that is a personal journey. Another knife maker cannot adequately quantify what paying dues means, right?
Hmm.
You've paid your dues. Like, you've learned things the hard way. You've learned things your way. You've gone through trials and tribulations, and you've reevaluated how exactly knives, um, you it acts as a medium for self-expression. And so now you're kind of at not a genesis, because I think you have a lot more things to add. Like, you're just kind of scratching the surface on it, but you've already like, you're like an iceberg. Like, what you see, like what people see, uh, in your creative sense is really only, like, I'm sure only the top 10% or 20% of what you really have going on and all these things that you want to accomplish with it. And who am I, as a fellow knife maker or somebody who appreciates the craft or anything like that, to poo in your Cheerios and tell you that you can't do something? Like, I'm just kind of like, like, if I ever had a say or if I ever had an opinion, it would be, dude, like, like, figure it out. Do those things. Like, the only thing that you can do is fail, and then
Yeah.
you try to fail less. And I try to be encouraging with that. And it's something that I get kind of mixed. Like, I haven't always had the best experiences with some knife makers on being gatekeepers. And um, it's something that I think we need to be mindful of, that our encouragement can be the thing that really pushes people to figure out their own lives and their own selves. Like, being that support system is very, very important to like, just just
Super
to
important.
people. It's just a human condition that you want to know that you're loved and that you're safe in some ways, and that your ideas matter, and that your failures are forgivable. And that's kind of why, like, I know, like, I get kind of esoteric about knives, but really I just spent a lot of time thinking about the parallels that I've experienced in knives and how that's applied to my life. And at some point in time, you just got to say screw everybody else. Like, if their opinions are distasteful, then you kind of got to do your own thing and try your own thing and see whether it pans out.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure knife making has played a big part in this, but I've adopted a really stoic attitude to things where, don't worry about the externals, right? Uh, and that's a that's the attitude I approached this when I came back to making knives. And I think that's why I'm enjoying it so much more, and why I think my work's so much better than it was. Uh, Even after not touching a you know, a tool in my shop for 2 years straight. Uh, it removes that element from your craft, and it lets your artistic capabilities flow. Um, it any of that, judgment that you felt from other people or anything like that is eliminated. Um, and you can focus on what you can do, and shit happens in life, but it helps you overcome that as well. And that's part of what really draws me to these complicated knives. Um, I could not make them and crank out single blades and make more money, but I'm really passionate about it. And part of it is that challenge, overcoming these obstacles and pushing myself forward. And if it wasn't for, people like Tony when I was starting out, I mean, Tony played a big part in this with his encouragement. Uh, and, the little bit of mentorship that he gave me, it was really impactful, really impactful. Um, and it helped me want to push myself and continue pushing myself. And then, you know, drag people along with me. You know what I mean? The one thing you said, the only thing I ask is that you pass it on, that you pass it on to other people. Um, and I love sharing what I know, uh, helping people out when I see, and there's only so much that you can do. I've learned to try to not spread myself out too thin, but I'm there to help if somebody needs it. If I'm able, I've got responsibilities. I've got a family and kids, and there's only so much that I can do, but I will take the time to help and share my knowledge and share what I've learned from other guys. And because I know what it did for me. Um, and there's gratification in that. So it is, there it is a little bit self-serving. And another aspect is that if you've got to teach somebody something, you you it you're reinforcing it in yourself. So in order to thoroughly and properly explain something to somebody, you've got to have a very good understanding of it. Um, so you're kind of reinforcing your understanding of what you do when you're teaching somebody else, which is cool. So it's you are getting something out of it, but I think what you're giving is so much more, you know, it's so valuable to somebody that I mean, in a way that it is hard to quantify, right? Because it is on a person by person basis and experience by experience basis. But that's how you keep it alive, man. You got to do it, right? I feel like that it's an obligation, but you know, everybody's their own person, so people are gonna act the way they want to act, and that's out of our control. We just have to do what we think is right,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, and I agree. I mean, there's definitely I think that self-esteem, like the love of oneself and life energy and everything like that, is a place where it's like a wellspring of stability. Um, and I think that there's a lot of chaos in a world where people don't understand their own worth, and I think that that's like a maturity thing. Like some people get it earlier than others. Some people toil with it all the time, and when I think about uh, the help that I can give other people, maybe I'm sacrifice a little bit of my time. Maybe it is valuable to me, but there's times when I feel like it's the same thing with like giving giving homeless people money. Sometimes you're like, man, like I mean, what is this $20 to me? I'm just going to waste it on a Netflix subscription. Like it really means like almost nothing. But for somebody else, it could be life saving. The ideas that you share um, are some things that those are peaks that you've already conquered, right? I mean, how hard is it to share that with somebody else and allow them to figure out how you climb it? Like, I mean, I could tell you how to climb Mount Everest, although functionally I can't. But I could tell you how to climb it, but you have to be the one to do it, and that's an
Yeah,
important part of sharing knowledge and being a good mentor and a good supporter that I think we have to think about collectively. Um, I'm kind of reminded. I experienced this like I was I got raked in my divorce and everything like that. I had a kid and whatnot, so like financially it was like really difficult. Um, and
mhm,
at some point in time, I was like, like the answer really is not that I'm trying to look for justice or like an equal playing field or that, the system was fair. I'm just like, I just got to make more money. And when you start like when you start breaking down your barriers and just say, I need to do these things in order to achieve what I wanted to, that extra child support money that, was maybe not necessary, but also, the courts awarded it. I don't care. Like, I mean, I don't care if you're being unfair to dad. I'm just going to make more money and try to like balance things out. You're not going to stop me by, keep like you can't keep me down. And I think that's the difference between like being victimized and having a victim's mentality. It's the same way with
yeah,
information. Like, you have to really evaluate what are the gatekeepers, and really the largest gatekeeper is the one that sits between your ears. It's that
yeah,
mind that tells you that you can't versus you're just playing around with it and figure it out. And I'm more than happy. Like I don't have the Rolodex of knowledge that everybody does, but in the ways that I can, I'm more than happy to share it. And that's kind of that's really something that I do like about knives, though, is that by and large, even with the fringe that are trying to um, uh, keep or have some control or whatever, that the majority know what that struggle feels like and try to do things to correct it and to be receptive towards people who are just seeking knowledge, because they know that giving somebody an idea is only half the battle. You still gotta kind of take that adventure yourself and make something out of it.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, I got to experience that a little bit last month when I went up to Jersey City for the Arts and Metal Show. And Thursday morning before the show, I was hanging out in the lobby, and here comes Wolfgang Lorschner and Michael Walker. We were sitting there just talking and, you know, shooting the shit. And they were just like super humble, awesome, nice guys. And it's like, I'm sitting amongst legends right now. If anybody can have an ego about their work, it's these two guys, right? But none of that was there. They're just like cool, normal guys. Uh, Happy to share knowledge, talk about stuff, and it was really cool. So yeah, I mean that I love that about this, the knife quote unquote community. Um, yeah, I mean that's if that was different, because I have seen, uh, had other hobbies and done other stuff where the attitude is a lot more gatekeepy, if that's even a word. Um, People are hold their cards tight. You know, I forget what the saying is. My brain's fried, but you know, they are not willing to share the knowledge, and it's so much colder. Um, and when like knife making, it means so much to me because of, as a creative outlet, it ticks so many boxes for me as an individual. It is my artistic creative outlet. I get to build things. There's the mechanics behind it that I can consider. I really love it. Um, but the community around it is just that extra layer of awesome that makes it that much more enjoyable. Uh, I before I was got into knives, I would go to a bunch of trade shows for technology stuff, and some of them are in the same uh, facilities that we go to knife shows at, and the vibe is completely different. Completely different. It's all competition, just cold business, and it's not fun at all. You know, some people are, people that you've seen before and you're friendly, but it's nothing like like this. Um, I've made really lifelong friends doing this stuff, and I don't know, man. It's special.
Well,
It
yeah,
really is.
yeah. I mean, like in corporate America, and a lot, and even crafts, there's corporate espionage and sabotage and a lot of foul mouthing, right? I mean, it's like,
Hmm.
I mean, being in IT still and everything, you have to watch your back because you're in a room with a bunch of sharks, or at least people that think they are, and you gotta treat stuff like that like water on a duck's back. You just gotta like let it fall right off you, and that's where I think that it's been a really great experience being part of this podcast and everything, because the reality is I kind of have to chuckle because I mean, I've had Bruce Bump and Steve Johnson, uh, just like Grace Horn, Delana, people like that. I think that by and large, most craftsmen have some type of imposter syndrome. Like they think that it's like wait
Yes.
until people figure out that what I'm doing isn't really that great, and it's like at what point in time does that bubble pop? But I think that that's part of why, like when you have that freedom to say, like, well, we'll just wait and see. If people notice that I kind of tricked them with this thing, or that it was maybe I don't find it super difficult. And then I'm sitting here like talking to people like yourself and all these other, great knife makers. And I'm like, dude, like it's probably not that people will figure out that you're an imposter. It's that you just, you think of things in a way that I can only describe as a human experience. That kind of stuff interests me because you're not one dimensional. Like you think of like we can all be seeing the same dress, but it's different colors. And
Yeah.
I really like that. I like that people, that come to the table and just say, like this is maybe how like I would approach it. But these are like a multitude of other ways that you might think of it. And you're talking about some grates and knives and being able to uh, shoot it with them. And I found that to be the case with a lot of knife shows too. Like especially like the one thing I really like about Atlanta is the pit. If I just
Mhm.
went as a uh, not a non-exhibitor, like a show goer, I would just want to be able to chill out and go see everybody's stuff and to go to the pit and be able to talk through things. Like I met Ken Onion at Blade Atlanta, super super nice
Mhm.
guy. I mean, somebody who's done like crazy stuff inside of the world of production knives and CNC. When everybody was saying you shouldn't do that or it's cheating, like these pioneers in knives. I sat the relationship that I had with Steve Johnson is that I sat right next to him, or he was behind me technically at Atlanta, and we started talking and everything, and I got to know him pretty well in that like that span of time, and you know. You just don't really get that the same way. Like I mean, it's a production to go to people's shops because when they're at their shops, they're really, you know, nose to the grindstone, as it were, and everything. But you do get a different experience when you're at shows and when you're doing um, the community work, I guess, in shows. And to me, I've always enjoyed it. I've never been to a show that if I remove the sales component of trying to um, make back the money that I invested in it, if I just take it for the experience, I've always really loved it.
Making your money back's like the worst part about it.
It's the hardest too. Like what's
Yeah.
funny is like there's like some old timers who would tell me, well, if you don't sell a knife on your on the first day, then you have to go back to your room or whatever and take a good hard look in the mirror. And I'm like, what an unfair way of treating a show where the monetary aspect of it is the first point. Now, I would love to be able to sell enough knives to recoup a show, but if I remove that as a single barrier for me, the rest of everything I super enjoy. And so I just don't. I try not to think about it too much. I just go to enjoy the experience and to kind of feel out whether that's my kind of scene and everything. And I can't really say that I've been to a bad show if I've taken the sales out of it. But there's another aspect, obviously, that we always have to think about is the economy of making things. I mean, that more as a full time knife maker, is that sometimes it's a lot of feast and famine, and mostly famine.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's you know, like as knife makers, we're in business for ourselves too, so it's 100% on us. It could be tough for sure, it could be tough. But yeah, like you were saying, I mean, if anybody listening hasn't been to a knife show and you're passionate about knives, go. It's so worth it. Take the time to go to a show, meet some like-minded people that are into the same stuff as you are. There's, you know, everyday life stuff goes out the window. Politics, whatever, you know, where you come from, none of that matters. It's, you've got this thing in common, and you're already, part of that, part of it. And it's so welcoming too. It's so welcoming. They're a lot of fun. A
Oh
lot
yeah.
of fun.
I wanted to talk to you a little bit about these honeycomb liners that you have that you've been putting on your knives. Like,
Oh yeah.
what is that? Like, I mean, is that material that you buy, or do you actually produce that?
No, that is this circles back to the gatekeeping conversation, because I do that with my laser. Um, I got a laser, when was it? Like late fall, early winter of 22, and just started messing around with it. And when I went to go look for information on it on the internet, nobody wants to share it. There's barely anything out there. Uh, there's some forums and stuff, but there isn't like easily accessible information on how to do certain things. Uh, so I just did a lot of experimenting, and I'm just scratching the surface with the laser, and I love this thing. I bought it for marking, my maker's mark on my blades. I saw Jared Oser's maker's mark. He showed me. He's like, "Yeah, dude, I did this with a laser." I was like, "That's the cleanest mark I've seen. That thing looks great." That alone is worth it, to remove the stress of trying to stamp a blade and not all the issues that
Oh
can come
yeah.
with that as you're surface grinding, or you know the amount of stress that you put on the steel before heat treatment, and that causes warping and twisting, and you know it eliminates all of that. And then I was like, what else can I do with it? Well, I bet you I could do something on the inside of the liners that would look really cool instead of engine turning. Let me see if I could do that. And then, you know, uh, I started applying it to other things would, uh, that I'd come across in some of these more complicated builds. For example, doing like a super thin Sheffield long pull. They're really, really thin. And any of the keyway cutters, like I got a smaller keyway cutter to try to get closer to it, and it was just like 4 times thicker than I wanted it to. And I was like, you know what? Let me try cutting it with the laser. Let's see what that does. And it worked. And I was like, that's really cool. And then, I had a nail file I had to make uh, on this manicure tool, where it's basically two long pulls. So it's like two little channels, and inside of those channels it's a nail file. I'm like, how am I going to do that? So I started researching a little bit on that. And I'm like, I don't, whatever I try to do, it is not going to look like what they did back then, because they would stamp them in. Um, and I'm just not going to be able to do that on, powdered stainless steel. Um, and then it dawned on me, like, let me see if I could do this on the laser. Start messing around with that, uh, and made a super clean nail file that sat in like a long pull basically. Um, and then I made an actual nail file for the other side of the blade, where before I was cutting that on the mill before heat treatment. So all of these cool different applications, and now I've started uh, experimenting with. I was like, well, now I've got this tool that I could use this with, that that I can break out of the box of what I know as an opening mechanism for a slip joint. Let me make a different shape for the long pole. Who says I can't do that, right? All right, so I've got this shape. All right, let me add some more elements to it. Let me make some lines in there and some cool details. Have it work more. The lines flow better with the shape of the knife. So like, it's a lot of fun. They're really, really cool. And another great thing about them is I lay my parts out on my steel with the laser, before cutting them out instead of edit sticky paper. It's a game changer. It's awesome. So I can set kind of pilot holes where all I have to do is find it with my punch and go down. It's exactly how it was on my design. Uh, I don't have to worry about the paper coming unstuck because of the heat from the bandsaw or as I'm grinding the profile and that shifting around. And I mean that mark is there, and it's not deep enough where it's it's going to become an issue down the line, but it's it doesn't go away, which is great. I'm having a lot of fun with that, and I think there's so much more to do with it. So that's kind of a cool, introduction of new technology into a really old craft that's allowing me to uh, push the boundaries a little bit more on this. Um, and that's something we were talking about before, where I was kind of stuck in this box of what I'm supposed to do as a traditional knife maker. Uh, that I've broken out of. And since I did that, I've embraced doing things like using the laser for cool honeycombs on the inside of the liners. That's not traditional at all, but it looks cool and I like it. you know? uh, and it's had a really good, it's been received really well. So I think that change in my attitude in how I make stuff and making stuff that I like, not trying to chase the market, right? I think that's something about knives that's kind of unique. It's it's really hard, if not impossible, to predict where it's going to go. Um, Trying to chase a trend, by the time you hit it, the trend's already shifted to something completely different, and you can't really predict where it's going, right? And that's something I'm learning on the production side as well. Even just something as simple as handle material. Like, okay, I'm going to pick black canvas micarta. That is like a staple that will always be popular. Guess what? Black canvas micarta is not popular. You know what I mean? It's like, how did how could you have seen that coming? Like carbon fibers back in. Carbon fiber was dead a couple of years ago. Now it's hot again. Like, where are these? You just don't know where these trends are going to go. So you just have to do what you want to do. Uh, and it takes stress out of it too.
Yeah. Well,
So,
I mean, so the honeycomb, man, what I think is really cool about it is the dimensionality. So you have basically a hologram um, geometry and everything to it. It reminds me of like the days when I used to collect baseball cards or things like that, where you get the foil and everything, and it's just like, oh man, like
yeah,
it's eye catching. But then to realize that for the most part, when you put that thing together, you don't really get the most access to it to see all that cool geometry. But you just get a little peek. You have the blade open,
yep,
and it's just it's there, and it's like that card that that you won't be able to like handle too much, but that it's there. And some of those things are really cool, like the I can't remember, it's the sleeve board that you did last year, and where you get to see
yep,
the pockets where the punch and the corkscrew come out, and you do get to see.
yeah. And there's a little honeycomb
Yeah.
peeking out there.
To
Yeah,
me, it's a touch of modern that is just kinda, like, super
yep.
rad, dude. Like, I can't tell you how much I like those kinda things.
Yeah, thanks. And it was funny. I mean, this kind of goes back to what you were talking about with the imposter syndrome. And it's almost like, you're waiting for people to figure out that you're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants and making this stuff up as you go along. I had no idea that those honeycombs were going to come out with that kind of depth and geometry to them. that's just how the laser cut it with the settings that I put in. I had no clue. When that thing came off the laser, I was like, that is way cooler than I could have ever imagined it being. I was just hoping for, honeycombs on there. I didn't know they were going to come where the light's going to hit it from different angles and they're going to change color. That's awesome.
Oh yeah.
Just a just a happy accident.
Yeah. I'm interested to know, like, on titanium liners, if you do the same thing and you apply different laser intensities for a temperature, that you can not only have the same
Mhm.
effect, but then also have different color spectrums based on the temperature that you can achieve with hitting titanium in those angles and intensities.
Yeah, so I've got a pretty cheap laser. It is a 50 watt, but I think it has something to do with uh well the part of this laser doesn't give me that color range. I can get like a couple little variances here and there, uh, but it's not to the point where I can get those awesome anodized lasered colors that you've seen on stuff. Uh, that'll be, when it comes time to upgrade, I guess. Uh, so I do that on the titanium, and something because I'm newer to working with titanium. I just started doing stuff with titanium. I think the first knife I ever used titanium on was last year for Atlanta, and then I didn't use it again for a while, um, until Blade, Texas, this late February. And at that point, I added screws to some of my knives, and I started using titanium liners, which was fun. Um, and anodizing stuff. And with the honeycomb, a cool element that I discovered as I was going along was when I would anodize the titanium a different color, the honeycomb would change color too. And I was like, whoa, that's
Oh yeah.
really cool. So like I would anodize a liner bronze and then the honeycomb would turn purple. I'm like, that's pretty cool. I had no idea that was going to happen.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, man, there's so many different things that that can contribute towards an aesthetic, or like an
Mhm.
emotion that's evoked. I got in Texas, we're pretty much lawless now. Like we get to have like carry around swords and brass knuckles and all sorts of stuff. And there's I think it's Hot Metal Works down in South Texas. They make some really great, fairly lightweight titanium knucks, and
Uh,
they have a process where they take that thing and it's heated up to like I don't know, like red hot, and then they dip it in like muriatic acid, and the reaction that occurs with the acid and the heat makes these crazy spider webs and everything of it's like all sorts
yeah.
of different colors.
Is that like lightning
Mhm.
strike
Yeah.
stuff?
It's like,
Yeah.
it's basically just captures the turbulence that occurs by adding really hot titanium to acid. And I'm like, I don't know that
Who came
dude,
up with
somebody
that?
who is living dangerously. Um,
I
yeah.
know. Let me see what'll happen if I throw this red hot piece of titanium into this acid. I'm sure that's gonna go well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it looks super awesome. It costs a little bit, like quite a bit more for that finish. But man, it makes a world of difference. I think I got like a mono nook for my wife that has that on it. I can't remember, maybe not. But we both bought some, and I was like, man, that's another element of shows where I love hate it, because I always like any money that I make, I usually end up either buying handle material or buying other cool things that I see around, whether it's a knife that I've been wanting to collect, like an antique or a maker or whatever. I'll probably never actually walk out of a knife show having any money to my name, because I always find things that just inspire me, whether it's like as a collector or as if it's as something I can use in my work. I'm always
Hmm.
reminded of that.
Yeah. Yeah, I always spend a ton of money on handle material shows. But uh something I love is seeing other people do stuff like that, and it inspires me to do things, or you know, it'll give me an idea to try something different. Kind of like that little spark that'll, I mean, this happens to me sometimes in conversations with people where like an idea will just dawn on me off of something that we were talking about or something, and I'll just kind of pause and stare off in the distance like, Eureka! Oh, I never thought about that. Like that solves this problem for that. Like, whoa, maybe I could try this. And that's like constantly when I'm at a show looking around, the little tiny bit of time that I get to walk around and look at stuff. It's like, oh man, okay, then that gives me the idea to do this and that. And, oh, I don't have enough time to do all this stuff.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah, I've thought about it for several years, and the only person that I've ever seen do it is Tyler Turner, but I'm almost definitely sure that I saw him make a slip joint that had a tapered tang on it. So he tapered the liner and scale material, and then tapered the spring, and so it has that traditional taper tang look, but it's in a folding
Mhm.
knife. And I mean, I've looked at a lot of different examples, but I think that he's the only one that I've ever seen do it in a modern setting. Um, and
Yeah.
I like Tyler a lot because he's always willing to kind of push the envelope on things that he sees, and he's really just like um, you know really country smart. He just
Yeah. I mean, he's like a jack of all trades when it comes to knives, man. I remember the first time I met him was in Blade in Atlanta. Uh, was it 22, and I'd never heard of him. I was out of knives for a while, so a lot happened in those 2 years. Uh, and I saw his work, and I was like, "Whoa, that's awesome! Like, where did you come from?" And then the next thing I see, he's making an integral frame uh, flipper out of you know like a twist titanium that he made himself. I'm like, "Where'd you get this from?" He's making his own like Timascus around it. I know it's like a proprietary name or whatever, but he's doing that, and then he's doing this crazy dagger, and I'm like, this all looks like you've been doing these things your whole life. Like, dude, awesome.
yeah.
And I mean, actually, one of his knives inspired one of my designs. He made this a flipper. It was like, I think it was inspired by a Texas toothpick. And when I saw that, it was one of those moments where it sparked that thought in my head, and then led to one of my newer designs that I came out with. They don't look anything alike, but it was one of those things where that inspiration hit me. I was like, I need to go draw something. I need to go draw something right now. Um, but yeah, it's really cool when that happens. And seeing uh, other people pushing their boundaries and what that can do for you as a maker. If everybody's treading water, not doing anything, it's not inspiring at all. Uh, making the same things over and over and over and over again, um, and not pushing themselves. It doesn't drive you to push yourself, or you know what I mean? It's not necessarily like a competition thing. It's more of an inspiration thing. Uh, and that's been fun too. I didn't mean to do it, but when I started pushing myself, I saw other guys like almost like, okay, it's I mean, it sounds arrogant when I'm saying it now, but it's like, okay, this is doable. Let's do it. Like, I want to try something crazy like that. Like, let me open that book and start picking through it and coming up with ideas and just taking it to the next level with these traditional folders. Because I mean, and we're on the first step of the flight of stairs, but it's fun to see other guys making these complex knives and really pushing stuff. And it's cool to know that, I may have played my hand in that a little bit. Uh, and it's further inspiring.
Oh
So
yeah. Well, there's I've seen it. Well, I saw it mostly in Sheffield knives, but there's I was talking with John Horgan about some of the work that he's been doing, and there's it's basically you flute or you kind of checker like things like mother of pearl, and in Sheffield is like mostly I saw it in context of mother of pearl, but then in the pyramids at the apex of each pyramid you drill a hole
yep,
and then you put like a gold rod or whatever and then burnish it. And I guess he said that the technique is called PK. And
yeah,
to me, I've always like when I look at a lot like fixed blades that were in the Sheffield era that have that, I've always been like, that's super rad. And it seems like super complicated, especially with the how brittle mother of pearl can be at times. But to do that on top of like a slip joint or whatever, that would be really cool. I mean, I know that you've done checkering in mother of pearl, but then to go through and PK each one of um, those little
yeah,
pyramids or diamonds.
yeah. I mean, I've learned how fickle mother of pearl is. The first time I ever did it was on that checkered Congress that you're talking about. I'd never used pearl before. Of course, the first time I'm going to use it, I plan on checkering it.
Yeah, of course.
What a nightmare!
Well, yeah,
What a
you did it
nightmare!
to yourself.
Uh, right? the the last knife that I made, was, uh, last like real complicated one was for arts and metal, and I spent a lot of money on pearl for that knife. A lot of money on pearl because next thing you know, I pushed something a little too hard, just a little bit, and there's a little crack. Oh my God, there goes $400 for the pearl.
Yeah, I mean, we were taught when we were kids, crack kills.
Right. But yeah, but that's part of it too, right? So you're in the middle of this build on this really challenging knife, and you're, getting closer to the finish line, and then you have a catastrophic event happen where your pearl handles that are almost done are now trash, and not letting that stop you, you know, having that, a little bit of stoicism where it's like, okay, it is what it is. What do I have to do now? Okay, let's make them again. Let's do it again.
Well, yeah, and when you're talking about the Stingray Sportsman that you took, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, and
Hmm.
the thing, the reality of it is that knife wouldn't have looked exactly the same unless you used that medium. I mean, to me, that is such an incredibly sexy looking knife. Like all of the polished surfaces, the blades, the geometry, that mother of pearl just makes it pop in a way that I just can't imagine it in some ways in a different type of configuration. But I know that, man, it's probably the fact that you do all those things, you have all those moving elements, and the fit and finish is spot on, and then you add mother of pearl and its fickleness to on top of that, and you look at that and you're just like same thing that you think of when you think of those Sheffield blades. It's like, how did they do that?
Yeah.
And that's pretty damn incredible.
Yeah. Thanks, man. That one, I thought of it come on my drive home from Atlanta last year. So that was, part of that inspiration from the show. I was like, okay, I've made several knives out of the Sheffield book now. Like, what do I want to make next? It's like, let me make one, let me design my own this time and adopt elements from that. And it's like, okay, so I want to do this, I want to do that. Like, what could I do with the frames? Let's do an integral titanium frame. I've never done that before. That's gonna be cool. It's like, okay, what can I do with that? It's like, you know, let's color them and put pearl on it. And my initial plan was to blacken the titanium and have the pearl. But as I was working it, normally when you uh, when you're using pearl, you'll put gold leaf behind it to make the color pop. I was like, I could anodize the titanium gold, and that'll accomplish that. And it's a little bit more on the bronze side, but it really made them pop, and it just worked. Yeah, I agree. I don't think it would have been the same, even with like a gorgeous piece of ivory on it. It just wouldn't have come together quite the same as it did. I was really happy with it. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears in that knife, but it paid off in the end result. Uh, yeah, yeah, I'm glad you saw that one. That one's pretty cool. I was
Oh
happy
yeah.
with it.
Well, and talking about like kind of like different ways to skin a cat. I've seen that uh, Daniel Cowan has instead of like this um, anodizing route for getting colors and things like that.
Oh
He's
yeah.
done gold plating and whatnot, and
I was talking to him about that the other day on the phone. Yeah, that's such a cool little detail. It's one of those things where when I saw it, I was like, damn, why didn't I think of that? That is so cool. That is awesome. Well, yeah, it's one of those little details where he was like, you know, screw what everybody else thinks or whether I'm supposed to do this or not. I think it looks cool. Let me throw it in there. And, sometimes when that happens, it's the best stuff you do, or, the best little detail touches, and it kind of becomes your thing. Um, and that's what really distinguishes you from other makers. Uh, but yeah, that is an awesome little detail that he adds in there.
well, yeah,
Really changes, and it's something that's a lot of people don't think about the details on the inside of a slip joint. There's not much room to look around in there, but it's just like the icing on the cake. You know, you've looked around the handles, you look at how clean the finish is, how tight, the liners are against the back spring, how flush everything is, how clean the satin finish on the blade is, how consistent and nice and the grind is, how smooth the action is. And then you look inside the knife and it's just like there's a whole nother little thing going on in there. And it's just like, wow, over the top. Awesome.
yeah. There was an episode of the Catchbit show where Neil and Mike specifically were talking about Stanhope knives, and this like a Stanhope lens or whatever is this little micro lens that has an image on it, and it's very small. So like when you hold it up to the light, you can see the image because the way that the lens projects it, it's like spy era, like that entire technology of being able to take microfilms and read them in a
Uh,
specific type of light. But I can't remember if it was Wilson Home or who exactly it was that would make knives and then put different lenses in it, so that way you could see like the Statue of Liberty or things like that, and carry around a little piece that is like a souvenir of sorts, but it has
mhm.
little trinkets, and you might not ever notice it. Like the diameter of that lens is so small that you would miss it if you didn't know that that's what it was. And I'm sure that lots of knives have gone the way of the dodo in collections and other things, that they're probably Stanhope knives and nobody ever know about it. But it's those little things that it always makes you wonder, like, is this thing more complex? What's in the inside that counts. And I've always enjoyed that. So anytime I see people that are willing to sweat the small stuff and to do things
Mm.
that maybe nobody would ever see or maybe even necessarily appreciate, but it's an element of what they find interesting. That's super cool. Like, I mean, what modern knife maker is actually adding Stanhope lenses to their knives, and what kind of imagery or things like that can you use with modern technology and polishing methods and everything like that? Who knows? But I don't. I don't know of anybody that I've seen who does it, but I mean, it's a pretty crazy concept, and it's just, I don't know. I like things that interest me in knives, and there's a whole lot of stuff that if you just like kind of paint outside of the box a little bit, um, you can really just achieve some really crazy ideas.
Yeah. Yeah, just stepping out of that, you know, uh, your comfort zone a little bit, stepping out of that self-imposed cage that you put yourself in, or what you think is supposed to be. Like, we're in a creative uh, element here. The point is to push things and, not restrict yourself to things that you think are supposed to be a certain way. I mean, there's but outside of functionality and whatnot, but um, and unless that's exactly what you want to do, right? So there's guys that strictly make super traditional stuff, and that's what they want to do, and that's what they're happy doing. That's fine. That's totally fine, and they do amazing stuff. But if you do want to be creative and artistic and express yourself that way through your work, imposing those limits on yourself is I mean, it sounds redundant that I'm saying it, but it is, you are restricting yourself by doing that, by trying to adhere to, I don't know if it's like a community imposed rule set or what, but and this is another thing that when it comes to traditional knives, right? Like when I started modifying knives, I learned about micarta. The first One of the first experiences I had with making like knife making stuff, I traded somebody. I was doing wood carving, and I traded somebody this carving uh, that I'd made for a knife that they'd forged, just like the blank. They didn't have a handle on it, and then I started looking at stuff. I found out what micarta was, and then I immediately went and I made my own micarta. Uh, and I was talking to the dude, and he sent me some like copper weave that was in the frame of that's used in the frame of Apaches. I don't know. I forget what industry he was in, but he had access to some of the stuff, and he sent it to me. And I, layered OD canvas with this copper mesh, and used marine epoxy and glued it together. And I put that on that knife. And then, so I kind of rolled that into the traditional stuff when I was modifying them. And some people had like a vitriolic reaction to it. Like, what do you do? That is blasphemy to put these modern materials on these knives. I'm like, says who? You know what I mean? But there was that pushback, and that I kind of got stuck in it a little bit. Like, oh, there's things you're supposed to do and not supposed to do with these knives. Like, I was adamantly against using screws on my knives for a set amount of time because I wanted to hold on to that uh, traditional aspect of them, but um, I was really just limiting myself. And now, I still pin knives together and I screw them together too, and it gives it a totally different look and feel, and changes them just from that one simple change. It totally changes the knife, and it's a lot of fun. And it's one more way that I can, I guess, kind of express myself in my work. If that's doesn't sound cheesy,
Yeah, no,
I'm sure
no.
it
I mean,
does, but
and I get it. And I think it. I was talking with Lynn Ray on an episode of the podcast, and something that he's done over the many years of making knives that he has is give himself certain constraints, right? So there's certain design constraints or artistic constraints or whatever, and yeah, you kind of you paint yourself into a corner, as it were, because you are deciding to limit yourself on certain aspects of making. Lynn, he'll take like a certain piece of steel and he'll forge it out into his X-ray knives, right? So X-ray, his last name, and
Mm.
he does things like that where he's like, I want to push the limits on. Let's talk about the roots of bladesmithing and how these blacksmiths and bladesmiths took very very little of something and turned it into something functional, or something functional and beautiful. And I think that when we like, the paradigm shift isn't artistic constraint. It's removing the barrier of where artistic constraint and peer pressure are looked at as the same thing. And I'll use an
Mm.
example, like Tim Robertson. Like, I love Tim Robertson. He's has helped me an immense amount in my knife making, and just the way that I think of things and techniques that I use, right? And one might look at Tim's work and say, okay, well, he's a traditional guy. He makes traditional knives, but there was a point in time where you can see a difference in his work, where he said, the my artistic constraint is to take these traditional knives that have variation and people look at patterns differently, and to establish what I guess the gold standard in a traditional pattern would look like. And
Mm.
and you look at the his finishing techniques and everything. Like, I'm looking at an HTT 4-inch integral that he made, and man, I've seen his knives. I look at them and I can tell no difference in fit, finish, quality, anything, action, from what you see in a picture versus what you feel in your hand. It's a really crazy constraint that he's put on himself to make things that I can't tell you why it looks so good. Obviously things are executed really well, but his fit and finish and are just immaculate. And then you add on top of that when you actually feel the things, the action is just it's money, right?
Yeah.
And traditional, he's pushing the boundaries on the traditional market and mindset, and he's doing it in a way that is a constraint of himself, right? It's him
Yeah.
taking something and saying, what if I did this, but I did it in a way that these are my only options, right? It's like it's only an
Yep.
option that I this flows in this way. It's only an option that the blades have this type of attitude, and I combine these materials and whatnot. And he makes a gobs of his own tools. He has, like, he's a
Mm.
madman when it comes to tinkering with things, and most.
We talk about that
Oh yeah,
all the time.
and well, I mean,
It's
look at happenstance, right? So, like, somebody like Tim, he pursued this, like, what can you do with a pantograph? Like, there's really not a lot of pantograph people out there, and then he becomes an authority on pantographs, like this, like, super
yep.
niche, nobody else cares about it type of thing. But those of us who have pantographs have, like,
Yeah, he's the
oh yeah,
go-to guy.
well, and I mean, when it comes to knife making and lasers and things, like, you're pushing some envelopes that um, I wouldn't know how to figure it out myself. I know exactly who I'd come to if I had questions on it. And like, like building the Sheffield um, inspired knives, dude. I don't know. Like, every time you turn around and do something that I've seen in that book ish that you've made, I'm like, man, I don't know. Like, if I ever got into like a wild hair that I wanted to build those things, you'd be one of the first people I'd come to actually talk through why I probably shouldn't. And then if you don't dissuade me, then I'll be like, okay, maybe I'll try
Oh yeah, right. I'd try to convince you as hard as I could to
it.
do it.
It's a little sadistic, right? It's like, watch other people, like, suffer and fail at things like you had to.
No, but the fun part is watching them try it and then do it. That's what's really fun. And, providing that encouragement and motivation and any help that you can along the way. It's like, it's really gratifying. And then, seeing that your hard work doing it blind is helping somebody else do it. So like like my buddy Dave Cramp, for example, he's pushing it himself with complex builds. And he'll give me a call and we'll talk about a certain mechanism or this knife and what's inside of it. We don't know. So we'll start talking through these mechanisms and how these things come together. And like, okay, well, we know that there's this on the backside. We don't have a picture of it, but we know that this tool is there. So like, what spring is it sitting on? How does that change the geometry of the spring? What direction does this have to sit? How are you going to, uh, you know, lay out the liners? Um, how are you going to have enough room in the blade well for these two blades to sit when you've got that on the backside? Like, you know what I mean? And walking through those processes and figuring that out together, like it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And yeah, I think circling back to early on in our conversation, that kind of motivating each other uh, and passing the knowledge on, it's really gratifying. I think it's super important. I think it's super important.
Yeah. Well, I mean, speaking of cramp, like that, the Harfoot that he did, um,
Yeah.
yeah, like hiding that retention pin inside of the shield and everything. Like I looked at that, and the
Yep.
first thing I saw when I finally like saw what he was building, like I think for a little while he had kind of put some pieces of it online, and then I saw what he was doing. I was like, that is stupid. Like I don't know why
Right.
anyone would do
So
that to
cool.
themselves. And he figured this out, and I have to ask like how. And it's stuff like that where that's what I really like that reaction. I like it when I look at something. I'm like, I just don't know about this thing. Like how how can you measure the competitive nature that you have with other people when you look at something so stupid that just like boggles your mind and tells like you just like throw whatever you have in your hands at like out and you're like I give up. Like I just don't know if I care enough about anything as much as he cared about making that stupid thing that I just could never figure out, and it looks awesome and it's ridiculous and has like I don't think that there's anything I don't love about that. It's just a really crazy build.
Yeah, it's awesome. And the fact that, he just, he broke out of that box with what, that what uh has been done with patterns similar to that and trying new things. Um, it was really cool to see. Really cool to see. And I think we just like hit it off from that immediately. And now we just talk about wild builds. But that was awesome, awesome to see. And seeing what I mean, he's working on something really cool now for Atlanta. Um, I'm looking forward to seeing. That's going to be fun. And so is Daniel. He's bringing something really cool too. Uh, Somebody else who's inspiring me is Iridian.
Oh yeah.
Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
he made that. What's it called? That it's like a folding hunter with the. I'm forgetting what the mechanism's called. That part that protects the tip folds into the frame and locks the
Yeah, the
blade in
safety knife
place.
that he made.
Yes, and the swing guard on it. Just what an awesome build! I cannot wait to see that knife in Atlanta. Like, there's usually a few knives before the show, right? That I'm going to beeline it to check out. That's absolutely one of them. I cannot wait to see that knife. When I saw as he was building it, I'm like, man, this thing's gonna be sweet. And then just seeing the final product, you crushed it. He is really good, really, really
Yeah.
good.
And from everything I've seen, like super humble and very um
What a nice guy,
unassuming,
man.
right?
What a nice guy. Yeah,
Yeah, so I guess when he was in Oregon, he won bet
Oh, he
bet
swept
well,
it.
yeah, four awards, and that swing guard safety that he made won best hunter utility, and I'm like, I don't know if there's an award.
I think it won best in show. That one won best in show
Yeah,
too,
I
right?
think so. All I see on pictures is that like he has all of his awards, his accolades for just keeping his nose to the grindstone, and I don't know, dude. It's cool to me too that he's venturing down to the big show because I can't remember. Um, he was there last year, I believe, but I can't remember if he
Yeah.
wasn't an exhibitor, right?
No, he attended last year, and then he came to Blade West and he won best folder.
Yeah.
So that was really cool. And that was with, he's pushing that creative boundary. He made a lockback whittler of his own design. And there really aren't that many guys doing that. That's something that I was talking to Jared Oser about probably a few months ago now. That, yeah, there's a bunch of guys that make slip joints, but there aren't that many guys that are venturing out and creating their new patterns and pushing it in different directions, uh, kind of blazing their own trail. I'd love to see that. I love seeing that stuff.
Oh yeah.
I mean, as much as I love traditional knives, I mean, they're what got me into all this, right? This whole mess, falling head over heels in love with traditional knives. I mean, I got sucked into it fast. That's how much it was love at first sight, you know. But seeing seeing that extra creative element added to it makes it that much more special, in my opinion. And pushing yourself as much as you can, even with your self-imposed restraints, like Tim, for example, just trying to make it as good as he possibly can and improving every single knife. And he's breaking out of that box a little bit too. He's starting to dabble in coming up with different configurations and changing things up. Like he brought a lockback Whittler sow belly to Blade West, this past Blade West, I think, and that was something new. No, that was a new take on a super traditional design. Um, so he's going that way too. It's awesome, awesome to see. And like, what's also kind of funny is that what a lot of people don't realize, Tony was doing the same thing. Uh, the Zulu spear, the Warncliffe Trapper, uh, Lanny's clip. Those were his designs, you know, pulling a little bit from this knife and a little bit from that knife out of tradition, but making a new configuration. And they're kind of canon now. You know what I mean? People don't even consider them not traditional patterns or a new traditional pattern because it's so embraced by the community that it's like a little bit disassociated from. That was Tony being creative and coming up with his own stuff. Uh, and even minor little adjustments like the Wolford Hunter, that's a 1306 with a swedge, but it changes the look of the knife. And but it's just like a little detail adjustment that changes it, and it's super cool. But it's stepping out of that box a little bit. It's not staying strictly to what it's supposed to be. You know what I mean?
Y- Yeah.
Um,
It's cheeky.
yeah, but it's that extra little special element, like looking into a knife that everything's traditional about it, and then you look in and there's a gold back spring or a honeycomb on the liner, you know, just that extra little splash of creativity and detail in there, that really makes it special.
Well, yeah.
I love seeing that
Yeah,
stuff.
and one thing I like about this kind of like Renaissance period that you guys are doing, because I'm not in that, right? I'm looking at it from like purely as an admirer, because if you look at most of my knives, they're very plain's not the right word. I play a lot with like I guess what I consider neo traditional, right? So it's like
Mhm,
old patterns or takes on things, but new handle materials, different
mhm,
swedges, things like that. But what I see is just an awful lot of pushing that envelope in ways that, going back to like our conversation about, somebody might not actually see it, but Tim posted up a photo where he was like, it's the things that you will never see that you focus a lot of time on
yeah.
too, and to know that you guys collectively in this, it's kind of interesting because there's a certain portion of like the, I guess maybe it's the unintended consequence of Blade Show awards, where it's like, I wonder who's going to win it this year, right, or this show, and you have to look at like all these all of you guys are bringing a game where it's changing the landscape of what is expected at an award, right?
Hmm.
Like a judgment. And I'm always interested every single show to see who will win it, because when you're really focusing on just impressing the other guys that are also submitting work that is equally as complex and thought provoking and evocative. That to me is a I guess like an unintended consequence of an award process that actually makes the award more interesting. Like if it's just given to like whoever because of whatever politics or because I don't know, whatever reason. Like when you think that the awards are rigged, or that nobody cares about them, or it's always the same people that are winning them, or whatever, it becomes a little less interesting than when you just have a bunch of
Yeah.
people that say, all right, well, next year I'm going to just bring something that's going to floor everybody. They're not going to know the knife world and what's possible in the same way as they did last time. And that's really something that I've just enjoyed, is like it's a little bit ridiculous at this point, and I don't, there's no way like,
It's totally
yeah,
absurd, but it's so
yeah,
much fun. And I mean, I look at it as an unintended benefit, because we all just keep pushing each other, and we're all friends, and we all love to see it. Like, um, you know, talk about somebody that's stepped out of the box. It was a huge inspiration. It still is for me. Jared Oser, uh, completely changing the landscape of, you know, quote unquote traditional slip joints and adding that modern element to it. Uh, and his designs and everything. That's just like when he first started out, it was like blasphemy, burn the witch, you know what I mean?
yeah.
Uh, but it's just like he's doing what he wanted to do, and it's awesome. It's awesome, and now he's completely changed it. Uh, and even I don't know if you saw that two-layer sportsman that he brought to Texas. But even seeing him like step out a little bit and do that, and we were talking about the corkscrew and kind of walking through that and little hangups in the process of building one of those. It's like sharing knowledge and inspiring each other to do stuff. So cool. Uh, it it changes the atmosphere. You know what I mean? Um, it it starts shifting people's perspectives a little bit. It's just like, all right, like Tim will call me up like, I ain't got to tell you what I'm building this time. You know, it's like, what are you making? What are you making? How bad is how much harder do I have to work? Call me. We'll be talking smack, and it's fun. It's a lot of fun, and then we'll start talking over little details of stuff, and we'll be sharing techniques and like, oh, I got this tool and a total game changer. You got to try it out for this and that, and yeah, I mean, it's really cool stuff. I love it.
Yeah. Well, and I think that, man, there's lots of ways that competition and things can be unhealthy, as it were. But you combine these elements where people like you have the autonomy to decide on how far you're willing to push it and how much you're willing to compete, I guess. And as long as it's all done in good humor and to inspire each other. I think that that's really cool. Like, you know, Jared's Jared's take on knives in general is something that I've appreciated because he plays a lot with geometry and in different
Yes.
planes. And to me, that's really interesting because you look at something and you're like, huh, I I I never thought of it that way. And
Hmm.
it's like where, you know, pivot pins are and material choices and things like that. That is an enrichment to knives, that to me, like, he could play very easily in the traditional market and be very comfortable there. But, you know, comfort doesn't seem to be his thing. He's pushing it in a way that is just his mind's eye and whatever he's bringing to the table. And I don't think that there's ever been anything that I've seen that he's made that I haven't liked, except maybe when he, like, you know, cracks handles or things like that. If he's ever you know, once in a while showed that, it's like, like, oh man, this could have been so great, and then you know, something didn't work out. But I mean, everything
Yeah.
I like. I like a little bit of that. Behind the scenes, like, failures do happen and you don't always get this you know, prim and proper, you know, pretty looking knife at the end. Like, you really got to work hard to push that envelope and make it into what it is. Like, it's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears. And I've appreciated that about, like, a little bit of a peek behind the curtain, as it were, with everyone in the knife community now. Social media is great for that. It really sucks for trying to eke out a living, because sales are really difficult. But if you're just using social media to show cool stuff that you're working on, I think it's, like, super great.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and it's, I mean, so I've kind of I've been putting a lot more effort just in the last month to give a little bit more of that peek behind the scenes. I've been using Instagram as kind of my catalog for a while, and uh, my buddy Trip Miller, who you had him, you did a couple episodes with him, right?
Yeah, I split his long
Okay,
conversation into two shorter episodes.
yeah. So I saw what he was doing with Enrique's group and kind of pulling Enrique out of his shell a little bit, and uh, I thought it was really cool. And then it kind of dawned on me, like, I like the stuff. Like, I guess I mean I should probably be doing this too. And I was talking to him, well, because Instagram, everybody's getting hit. I've got restrictions on my account, and it's kind of you see where it's going, right? This is the second wave where they've just gone and restricted tons of knife makers accounts. So it's like, okay, I can tell which way the wind's going on this one. Uh, and I'd had a couple of conversations with people before about, the Facebook group and the importance of that, uh, and kind of having a sense of community in a group, and where that would be a great place to show that work in progress stuff and little videos on how I do things and just throw them in the group. Um, so I've started doing like little live streams in there once a week and showing around my shop. Like, I haven't done a shop tour since that Rob Bixby interview. My shop's changed like 6 times since then. It's completely different in the same room, but totally different. I was like, because when I see other people's work in progress, like if I see slip joint parts on a table, I'm like, oh, whatever. but that's what I see every day. That's not what a collector sees every day. And talking to Trip and talking to my buddy Corey, who's helping me out, he's like, that is the content that we want to see. I'm like, well, well, that makes sense, right? It's boring to me because that's what I look at all day, every day. But yeah, maybe I should start sharing a little bit more, kind of a little bit, peek behind the curtain of what's going on. Um, and there's been a good reaction to that, and I'm enjoying it too, right? Uh, Talking to people more, just doing a live stream, even if there's 2 or 3 viewers as we're just starting it in the Facebook group, it's still fun. Uh, and I forgot where I was going with this, but yeah, the it's giving somebody a little bit more of an insight as to what's going on in the shop and a little bit more about myself. Uh, Whereas, I mean, I prefer to kind of not be, you know, not put myself out there. I put my work out there. I'm happy to show my work. I don't like taking, you know, pictures of myself, and you know, it feels a little bit
Disingenuous.
well, almost not necessarily disingenuous, but like who wants to see a picture of my ugly mug?
Oh
You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, why do you care what I'm doing? Or you know what I mean? So it's like, you're here for knives, let's see the knives,
yeah,
right? That's what I want to see. Let's see the knives. But when I found myself enjoying that, even though I'm friends with Enrique and I know the guy, and just like the little 30-minute live streams that he'll do with Trip, I'm like watching it, like, this is awesome. This is what I want to see. Uh, it's really cool. It's really cool. So my perspectives shifted on that a little bit, and I'm trying to do the same thing. And I think it's going to help push me back into my roots a little bit with work in progress stuff and tutorial stuff, which I also really enjoy doing. What I hate doing is documenting
yeah.
it, documenting it, uploading it onto social media, and then following up with that.
Oh yeah. It's a lot of work.
Uh, yeah, it's a lot of work, and there's a lot of work on the bench. You know what I
Yeah,
mean? It's like, is taking these videos and posting them to social media gonna pay the bills? I don't know.
yeah. Well,
But I think it comes around. You know
yeah,
what I
for
mean?
sure. And like for me, I think probably like what I mean by disingenuous is kind of like I am not always very comfortable sharing stuff of myself. Like what you see out in my shop or what you see kind of like I'm working on is sometimes very tangential. Sometimes it's very chaotic. Sometimes it's very like not until the last minute, right? I'm not a super methodical type of guy. I really,
Yeah,
I
same
just
here.
don't, if you went out there and I could show you everything that I'm working on, but if you really like stepped out there, like whenever I die, if I'm still like making knives and stuff, my wife is gonna be like, I don't even know what any of this stuff is. Like,
Same
why
here.
is it in this place, and does it have any context? Like, you'd have to spend a while just trying to figure out like what was going on in this guy's mind. And for me, I, there's a certain portion of trying to curate myself so that way I can post it online that it does not represent me. Like I'm a train wreck like 98% of the time. I'm surprised that I get anything done in knives. I maybe that's something I should take as a hint for better discipline. But something there. Talking about uh, doing these videos and things like that, and kind of like some of the the context of foreign makers, I guess. Like we have a lot of like US centric makers that we follow and we do stuff with, but I really enjoy makers that I get to see that are in different countries. South Africa has been really interesting to see some of their build processes and
Hmm.
logic, because some things are actual their cultural norms, and they come into play with how they think about things. There's a maker that has done a lot of like um, uh, I don't know if he's necessarily just a loveless maker. Well, I mean he's not. He does like a lot of crazy stuff, but it's a Hiroshi Suzuki,
Yeah.
and uh, his work in progress stuff. You know, because there's kind of like a language barrier, and it's like a translate. Like, how well does this translate? Well, some most of the time, not very well. Facebook doesn't do a great job of that, but to see some of the things that he actually cares about in his builds, and areas where he focuses on and says, you know, I need to take a picture of this. To me, is actually really interesting. Not only is he just like a world class knife maker, I mean, his phenomenal fit finish, and I mean everything. It just he does such a good job. But additionally, he provides a context for knife making where you have a
Hmm.
lot that you can learn. Like some of the ways that he tapes certain things off with just this like very slight cellophane tape, or dude, I don't even know. Like the way that he looks at things, the things that he focuses on and shows pictures of or whatever. It doesn't like it breaks down language barriers because you're using visual elements to convey something that's
Yep.
important, and I really like that. To me, I sometimes like I'll see his name hit on my like Facebook or whatever, and I'll just like spend 45 minutes or an hour scrolling through his, you know, the last month or so of his builds, and I'm like, man, like you ever want to feel like a small person in a small pond, like an even smaller person in a small pond, like look at some of the work that he does, and it's just incredible stuff. And I like that. I like to be able just to kind of, it's not humbling. It's inspiring me to like get off my butt and actually do something creative and to think differently about things. And I think that um, knives to me is probably the thing that I've spent the most time studying and doing next to playing violin, which I started playing when I was
Hmm.
10 years old. And so like I spent a long time playing it both semi-professionally and doing a lot of different aspects of classical violin, chamber, fiddle competitions, all sorts of stuff, right? And knives has been the thing that has been the least boring thing to me, along with violin. And I've spent the majority of my life so far invested in those two things. And
Yeah.
I really just look at it being like it's like a wellspring. There's just so much that you can pull from it. There's so much that you can focus on. There's so much that you can do, and you just get in the right element. And man, the sky's the limit. Like I mean, who knows what kind of person you can be in a year of just hyper focusing on one element or one idea. And there's a ton that exists in knives, like Iridian and doing scrimshaw on his slip joints and stuff.
So
Yeah,
cool.
like I hate scrimshaw. Like it's the worst thing for me because I suck at it. But I love it because it's so amazing. Like there's so many different techniques that you can apply. Like I had Linda Carstone on the show, and how humble she has been with an illustrious career in scrimshaw, touching some of the greatest artists in knife making history's work with your own artistic abilities. To me, like yeah, I don't
Hmm.
know, dude. It's just there's so much. There's you could spend 3 lifetimes making knives and still not touch all of the areas of knife making that you could.
Oh, absolutely. And uh, another thing that's kind of put that into, you know, made me think about these work in progress pictures and stuff like that. Letting people see that, something that's really kind of made me think about the value behind that and the kind of the importance of it. I don't know if you've been seeing Javier Vogt. I can't, I don't know how to pronounce his last name. VOGT. He makes those amazing automatic folders. He's been doing a progress post on his Instagram, just like detailed pro- uh, progress posts on this awesome knife and all of the tiny little details that go into it. And I've just been glued to it every time he posts. I'm inspecting every picture, and it made me kind of think about the stuff that I do that I take for granted, but you know, somebody that buys one of my knives, they're never going to know that I took that time to do that. That there's so much. I mean, talking kind of like inlaying a shield, something as simple as inlaying a shield. The measurements that I take, the how I decide the placement, how even something like marking the locations of the scale pins on a bolstered knife, how I do that, and it's all very calculated and measured and laid out. It's not just a blind guess, you know what I mean? It's very thoroughly planned, and I may be shooting myself in the foot by doing that because it's taking me that much longer. Um, but it's to my standard, you know what I mean? And seeing him put these posts together on Instagram of all of the tiny little details of this knife and how cool it is to see, and just like I'm looking at one right now. It's just got, you know, he's where he's scribed something for these exact placements and measurements on things. Uh, but that's just something that you don't see when it's a finished product. You can see it and appreciate it and see how complex it all is when it's finished. But watching it grow, you know, watching it come from flat steel, you know, to a complete masterful work of art, it's really, really something special. Uh, so I mean that's kind of inspired me too to uh, sh- start showing those steps a little bit more, and kind of getting out of that. I don't know. It feels arrogant to even say that I think people would want to see that from me. You know what I mean? It's like, who am I to say that people want to see every little detail of what I'm doing? You know, I don't know. It's like not in my nature to think that way, but see, I appreciate it so much. And after talking to some people, you know, and they want to see that stuff too. And being totally capable of doing that, even with, you know, little things I take for granted that I do every day, that somebody just hasn't thought about, that goes into these knives. I think it's cool to see. It's really cool to see.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to push myself to kind of start doing that again. So I used to do it. I used to do
Yeah.
it,
Well, I mean, perfect
and
example is like I saw you inlaying those shields. It inspired me to buy a pantograph. It had like stemmed the relationship that I have with Tim Robertson. Like you, um,
mhm,
I'm kind of reminded that sense that it's kind of the same, like like in Christian context we talk about like blessings and everything, or even, I mean, it's not even just in like that religious context, but just like good vibes, karma, everything like that. Like you never
mhm.
really know who you touch with your life energy, right? And
Yeah,
it's like a butterfly effect of like you can put an awful lot of like positivity and love and all those good things out into the world, or you can be like a curmudgeon and just live your life centrally, or like everything is about you and your experiences and how everybody is a means to an end for your own selfish will, right?
Mhm.
And I think about that. Like I have no concept of what like me doing, like, I mean, I spent a decent amount of time on this podcast stuff. Like people might not realize it, but I spent a lot of time editing, and I don't edit like content out, but I spend a lot of time like trying to balance things. I spend a lot of time thinking about it. Like my wife is like, you talk about knives an awful lot. And she's not saying it like, you know, in a mean sense, but she's like, like this is occupies a lot of your mind, doesn't it? Right. It's like, and I was like, I don't know. Like I think about this all the time, even when I'm not making knives or I don't have the capacity to. I'm looking through and doing research. I'm thinking about how I can make things better with this format. I'm bringing on awesome guests that can talk about inspiring things. I mean, every episode, I think about um, when we're talking, what are people doing? Like, are they researching things? Are they looking for the reference? Are they going to go
Mhm.
and look at Javier's work and see exactly what you're talking about? And somebody's going to realize that Javier is like their inspiration, right? Who knows? But I spend
Yeah.
a lot of time that you probably would not like have a lot of concept of unless you sat and had to edit this stuff for hours and hours and hours, especially when you have like 2 3 hour episodes. Probably spend another 6 to 9 hours doing all the curation for it, in addition with that. So I mean, it's a lot of time. And
Yeah.
sometimes there's just no easy way. Like there's no easy way to step past that, the quality and things that you need. Kind of speaking about Javier for a second, like detail work, like 2022, sometime mid-year, he was doing a Jimmy Schmidt tribute knife, and he did this like 18 karat gold pins, and he made a bail out of Damascus. And I'm like, man, like things like that are super crazy. Like when you look at the devil is in the details, he is a perfect example of
Mhm.
like how insane it is. And his style of guard, I don't know what you call it, like the guard lock automatic knives, is one of my, by
Yeah.
far is my favorite mechanism aesthetic of any knife I've ever seen. Like every time I look at them, or I've been able to like fiddle with them, I'm like, if I could make something, because it's so reminiscent of like uh, like Italian stiletto automatics, right? And
Yeah.
I absolutely love what he's doing. I haven't seen anything that has just been like unappealing to me. Like, yeah, dude,
Mind
it's like
blowing.
awesome.
He's it's
Well,
unbelievable. When I first saw his work, like I first came across his Instagram page, I was like, "There's no way.
yeah,
There's no way. This guy's
yeah,
insane."
dude.
And then to find out that he's doing this all by hand, he doesn't have a CNC, nothing. You know what I mean? It's just like, wow.
Yeah. Have you ever followed the a knife maker, Stefano Nardelli?
Let me see. I don't think so.
Um, Stefano he's an Italian maker, and his day job is actually, he flies helicopter. I can't remember if it's like search and rescue, or like whatever their version of the Coast Guard is, or whatever. It's some type of um, flying helicopters, and he has some like mechanism stuff that he's worked out, but he where it hides, the locking mechanism hides behind the bolster, and he has like a hidden clip that like recesses in and then pops out. It's like hello, and then you can stick it in your pocket. But he has melded together some really crazy concepts in horology with, like, he has some crazy watchmaking equipment that he's applied not only in his knives but also in making watch faces and other things like that. But then he's
Mhm.
also really big into lapidary, and dude, this mind-boggling. And he does everything by hand too. Like, yeah, like I think the most
Dude, I'm looking at this clip right now. That is
Yeah.
awesome.
I tried, I tried very hard, because we've known each other for quite a few years by now. And I tried very hard to get him on the podcast to talk, but he's like, I don't really speak great English. And I was like, well, I don't care. Let's just muddle through it. I want to talk to you about why you are insane enough to do the stuff that you do. And maybe one day I'll work him down, but, dude, like he has a day job and then he also does this stuff and he does it all by hand. Like all of these recesses and everything like that he does, it's all like parser plates and just insanity. I don't like his. I mean, he does these inlays with mother of pearl, like the blacklit pearl and stuff.
Yeah, that's the one I'm looking at
Dude,
right now.
some things in life are just unfair. Like I look at the stuff that he does, and I'm like, man, I don't know how you did it, and I really can't spend the time of thinking why, but I just do. I scroll through his stuff all the time. Like I'm a big fan of his.
Yeah, I mean, and I'm looking at this knife right now, and it's so beautifully polished, and you can't really appreciate a polished finish on something until you try to polish something and to keep it clean.
Oh yeah,
It's like you look at it the wrong way and scratches show
yeah.
up. Uh, I mean, I just went through this the other day. I was finishing this. I posted the little video of the knife up today with this polished bakelite. And I don't polish things very often, right? I like satin finishes a lot, um, more because of the utility of it. Uh, that is something that I really try to keep in mind when making a knife. That in the end, it is a tool, and I want somebody to use it. And when they use it, I want it to work, and I don't want it to, uh, you know, one time in the pocket come out looking messed up. You know what I mean? So I try to avoid doing really fine finishes that can get easily marred during use. But I still can really appreciate it, and sometimes some materials really call for it, and that this vintage Bakelite really calls for a nice polish. It just finishes so beautifully. Uh, but man, it is pain, a pain, a lot of tape, and just being very careful.
Yeah.
And to see something like that, it's just like the amount of work that goes into it to do it on something that's got so many elements to it. There's so much behind it, and that's just the cherry on top. Like we were talking earlier about somebody that could put $500 worth of material on a knife that's not made as good as it could be, um, and that being almost like a letdown, uh, because it wasn't executed to its potential, or the potential of that maker even. But to see something that is executed masterfully and then have those incredible finishes and materials and details that just push it way over the top. It's just like
Oh
unfair.
yeah. Oh yeah.
Unfair. Get
Yeah.
out of here. I don't want to see
Well, I
you
mean,
anymore. You make me
I
want to
I know,
quit.
right? No, no, no. I agree. That's always the way that I feel. Like Stefano. There's two things. Like, okay, the mechanism. Like, let's just ignore that. Like, the mechanism is great. It's like his own design and everything. He's done some stuff with like two toning Damasteel, right? Where the bevel is all etched, and then the flats are polished gloss, right? And
Yep.
it's like, I understand like how much I hate like high polishing things, but to go through that much detail and then have no deformation, right? Like no rounded corners where they're not supposed to be rounded, nothing like that, and to not touch that etch that he got on the bevels. it's stupid. But then, like on some of his stuff, like he did this one with a labradorite inset in carbon fiber of all things, right? It's like labradorite is a very blue, very chatoyant, and then to mix that with the carbon fiber that he did, to me is an insane juxtaposition of textures and things that I don't know, like in the US market. Some, like in Europe, some things are just sexy, right? There are certain plays on
Yep.
things that you have to be able to experience it and see them, like the fashion industry and things. And dude, all of Stefano's works is just sexy. It just screams that he is a playboy in knives, and I hate him and love him at the same time. And he's such a nice person. Like you talk to him about anything, and he'll share it. I think apart from maybe his mechanism, because it's like he tries to guard that because of how much time he spent developing it out. And they don't have like the same kind of patent laws and litigation and stuff overseas, as I'm aware of it. But other than like the for like it's like he shows most of how things work, but when it comes to like certain aspects of his mechanism that he developed, he tries to not take as many pictures of it. I think that we were
Mhm.
talking one time. He's like, I probably should just do it. Like, who cares? But then, he does have a lot of time in it, and it's like he's the only person in the world who's
Yeah.
doing what he's doing in the way that he is. And man, I don't know. I just live in this world of
And,
loathing, like self-loathing, because I'll never be great.
and that's understandable too, right? I mean, we're talking about gatekeeping and whatnot, but um, there is an aspect of like, let me have my time with it, and then I'll pass it on. You know what I mean? Uh, like for with patterns, for example. I'm more than happy to share my designs, but if it's something fresh, something new, like let me have some time with it first. You know what I mean? And then like give me a couple of years, then yeah, you can have it, sure. But let, let me hold on to it just for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and yeah, and I totally get that. It's just one of I think that there's a professional courtesy. Like I'm not married to patterns that I've made. Like it's conceited to say popular, but it's mostly saying my take on something, where I see it kind of creeping up in the zeitgeist, right? It's
Mhm.
okay to like hold off and just allow a person for just a period of time to do their thing, and uh,
Yeah, I think it's like a professional
yeah,
courtesy, right? Um, Even if it's something you know you could easily do and that you really, really like. But it's like that's kind of, that's their thing. Uh, let me see how I can express my creativity in my own way, and maybe let that inspire me to do something else. Uh, but um, but yeah, I mean, there is, and it almost sounds hypocritical. It feels a little bit hypocritical to hold some things to yourself like that, but it's like your soul. You know what I mean? Uh, and to give it all away freely immediately feels, I don't know if it feels like it cheapens it, or it's like you're removing yourself from it. um I don't know, it's a little hard to describe
yeah.
that that feeling of like wanting to hold on to it for a little bit. It's almost like you know the letting the baby bird fly to the nest. Sending your kid off to college. Not that I've experienced that yet, but I can imagine it's like, oh, I want to hold on to you, but you're free to go. Go on your way.
Yeah. Well, and
I'll make another one of you anyways.
yeah, I mean, I don't know, dude. Like well, I've experienced it both ways. Uh, you know, I have a style of finishing stainless that gets it real black, right? And I've had this,
Hmm.
kind of culture of like if I'm going to certain local shows or things, people want to know like how do you do that? And if you say, well, I mean, there's lots of ways to do it. You can figure it out. And they'll be like, oh, I will, like kind of like f you, like for gatekeeping or whatever. I'm like, it's not that. I took something that was like a knife adjacent thing and I thought, I'm going to apply it here. And now you're wanting to replicate that in your own stuff and be like, I don't know, derivative. And there's a
Yep.
certain portion. It's like, man, I just did this thing. Will you just give me a break for a second? Like, stop constantly trying to chomp on me. But then I've also been the kind of guy that has freely shared stuff. And man, uh, I was doing some early work in, well, it happened two times, like some leather stamping with 3D printing. I was like an
Hmm.
early adopter of 3D printing for leather stamps. I didn't see it anywhere else. I started doing it, had a company, worked with my brother to kind of let him do it because he had the 3D printer, and I was just saying, hey, this is a really good idea. And then people started copying that pretty quickly after we were kind of like, I'm kind of done with it. It's a little bit more work and not a lot of profit, but um, things like that, or doing some laser coaster work in like the avenue that I was, like everybody like will sit and ask you for your exact numbers, right? Like what are you running on your laser? I have a diode laser. It's not the same as like the fiber stuff that you're running, but um like coasters, like people want to know exactly what you're doing, exactly your speed and feed, as it were. And I'm like, dude, like come
Hmm.
on, like I had to figure this stuff out. There wasn't any information out there on how to do it in this medium with these results, and I don't know what to tell you. But I just like I do want an appropriate amount of time to just feel it out, because I think there's a certain portion of the effort that we put in that is also market analysis, right?
Yep.
There's combinations of things, there's patterns, there's finishes, there's even what you're doing in the context of social media or whatever. Who is it, like Birdvis Knives, does those whip wipes, and
Yeah.
I've kind of like flippantly done them. Like, I mean, but there's two things. Like, one, I'm very clearly doing stuff in a similar style to him, and I was just testing out to see, is this something like this ASMR stuff that people are more attracted to that than they are exactly what I'm working on. So I take something that looks kind of stupid looking and do the same thing. And dude, sure enough, people are more interested in like the stimuli that they get from something than what it is that it's actually being applied to. And I was like, okay, well, I mean, I'm kind of done with that, but market analysis and seeing what the market will bear and seeing like kind of how you can play with different stuff. y- th- You know, everybody else was like, oh, that's a super great idea. Tell me exactly how you do it. And I'm like, dude, like figure it
Yeah.
out. And I've just had to kind of like resign myself to the same way as I think of it in IT. It's like, dude, you're just going to bite off of the last my last good idea, but I got millions of them. Like I'm just like one thought away from the next thing. And so, okay, like whatever, I guess you're just going to take my seconds and do something with it. And I'm just going to have to come up with something else that is, something else. And
Yep.
but I do wish that there was more of a professional courtesy with people, and they weren't just so like blatant about trying to copy or ask you for things, or it was just derivative. Like, give you a shot. Like, it's the same way with like Kurt Romano with his Dino. Like
Yep.
he shared it with some people, and that was the mistake that he made, and now everybody makes it. And he was he wrote it out for a little while. He was doing other things and then started to share it. But the moment that you let that cat out of the bag, it's like kind of like you can't unring a bell, and then after that, that's it. I mean, you can't really go back after that, and you can't really cry about sharing things because you were the one that actually perpetuated it. It's
Yeah.
unfortunate.
Um, but so for with pattern sharing, I think that is I don't know if it carries over to other types of knives as much as it does with slip joints. Uh, I mean, it might be a culture that Tony established with him freely sharing all of his designs for people to use. And I mean, how many different people have you seen make landing clips? I've made landing clips.
Yeah.
I've made Warncliffe trappers. Not. I mean, I've made like a gent's knife sized Warncliffe trapper, but still, uh, that kind of culture comes around, and then it's almost like, uh, but that's very specific to patterns, right? Uh, and when it comes to sharing things, I've resigned myself to pretty much just always say yes. Uh, uh, to sharing some sort of knowledge or technique or something if somebody specifically asks me about something. And another thing is if I think they're serious, right? There's got to be that, time investment aspect to it as well. Because if I let any random person, you know, vampire 40 hours from me when they don't apply a single bit of it, like it's very frustrating. uh so I kind of try to gauge how serious you are about it before I invest my time. Because if you're just gonna, not do anything with it, then what's the point? Uh but I am kind of an open book. I won't volunteer absolutely everything, but if you ask me, I'll tell you. And that's like the same thing that Tony did. And I kind of try to, not that, I'm uh, doing it because Tony did it. I'm doing it because I like and appreciate that. I really liked it. I know somebody else is going to really like it. Uh, and I'm confident enough in myself that if somebody wants to do that, you know, uh, I'm already focused on something else. I'm already focused on my work, how I'm progressing, how I'm pushing myself further, coming up with my own new ideas. Like you were saying, like I've got a million other ideas right behind this one. So go ahead, have it. Like I'm just going to keep going down my path, not let that, uh, I don't know, not, uh, not feel, I don't know, guarded about it, guarded, but kind of trying to, I don't know. I, I'm all about, sharing what I've learned. And sometimes, like with the laser, for example, Jared showed me the laser. I immediately got one and I dumped hours and hours and hours into it. And then I've convinced like 8 other people to get them. And then I'm like, shit, I've got to teach all these guys how to use this laser, but it's so good. You know what I mean? And then they kind of go on their way and they're teaching themselves how to do it and they're working and it's helping them do cool stuff that I didn't think of doing with the laser. But so that's one of those examples where I was coming up with new ideas and new things and new ways to implement this tool that I haven't seen done before. Um, and if somebody asks, I'm more than happy to share it. It's kind of letting go of any ego tied to that. You know what I mean? Because I know it's going to do good for the community. Uh, and I don't know if I would feel the same way if it wasn't this particular community.
Yeah.
You know
Hmm.
what I mean? Because I know that those guys would do the same for me. If I picked up the phone and called somebody and said, "How do you do that?" They're going to tell me. So I'm going to do the same for
Yeah.
them. And that's the kind of culture that I like because this was a dying, like traditional slip joints were dying, and they're exploding again. And I think that's part of it. Uh, being open with people, sharing knowledge openly, being super encouraging, and wanting people to step their game up, push themselves, be creative, and inspiring where you can. Uh, and like there's new young makers coming up, making great stuff, trying new things. That I mean, that's what we want to see, right? Up until the last couple of years, I was like the youngest knife maker, not traditional knife maker, for like 8 years. You know what I mean? It's like finally I'm not the youngest. But so it's good to see. And I think that, I mean, that's part of it. Like for that making slip joints group on Facebook, there's tons of people on there, tons. And it's inspiring guys to make them. And it's just because people are sharing their knowledge. Now, I mean, it can get annoying in there because you've got a bunch of tire kickers that'll ask you a million questions like, where do you get your pin stock? Uh, so that can get frustrating, but if you've got the time, um, and you want to share the knowledge, that's a great place to do it.
Yeah. Well,
So,
Steve Schwarzer told me, he's like, sharing knowledge. Like some people just take that and run with it, and they surpass him. Like he's been in park um, the entire time. Like they take knowledge
mm,
and they just like they consume it, and it's in a way that um, I mean, they just do their own things. And I, the reality is that information, like I guess being like giving and free about information is a double-edged sword, right? Because on the one hand, you might be cutting your own throat, but on the other hand, you're providing a tool or a weapon for somebody else to be able to do their thing. And you, like, I agree. It's like it's a principle thing. It's like, are you okay with the ramifications of it? And I think it's probably more
mm,
like you have to be okay with what happens when you just when you do let the birds out of the nest. You gotta be willing to understand that you can't have an ego about it, and you can't get butthurt after the fact, like crying about um, letting things go after the fact. Like, and
yeah,
that's the way it is. Like, there's I've wanted to make since the first time that I saw Bill Rupel do it, the axe handle.
yep,
What is it? So it's like him and Rick Dunkerley, I believe, kind of came up with it, but it's the axe handle trapper. And there
yeah,
is nothing that I do not like about that design. Like that pattern is like banging. But the only people that I know that make it is Bill Rupel, Bobby House, and I think Rick. Um, and to me, it's been mostly a matter of respect to say, I really would really love to make it, but it's his thing, and it's their thing. And if it's not really my place to just say, okay, well, I could replicate that. There's enough profile shots and things like that that I could figure it out. It's more of a professional courtesy to say, hey, like as much as I admire it, maybe instead what I'll do is I'll split the difference and I'll just buy one from one of them and actually have it to use and whatnot. I'm mostly just interested in
mm,
like the look and the feel and how it feels in the hand. It's a really great little pattern and different too to the traditional market.
yeah,
I like things like that, and so making is kind of like my homage um, to makers and to ideas. If I spend the time creating something, it really is because I just think it's a super great thing. There's some things that are great
yeah,
ideas that I just don't think I could touch, but there are ways I'm like, I think I could probably do that. But it is not about money making. It's really about honoring that thing through my own making and to see if I can even do it. Um, and,
mm,
and I don't know. I mean, there's a lot of there's a lot of back and forth that I have in my mind sometimes about sharing too much, being too forward, how much innovation I'm doing in an area where people can see it and stuff. And then there's other ways where I'm like, um, at the end of the day, if you believe that things were infinitely worse when everybody was not sharing information and gatekeeping and everything, you got to be the person who also is the change agent for that. You got to break those
Yep.
changes, and you got to kind of suck it up and just do it. And I think the silver lining, again, like you said, is you get to see people that are doing stuff that's extraordinary and outside of the concept of what you thought was possible. On that slip joint and lockback making group on Facebook, it's been great to actually see people who have asked questions and have taken information, and then you see 6 months down the line, a year down the line, they're making something, and you're like, man, like where did you come from? You were asking it, and you were making like some real crappy knives. Like, I mean, honestly, they're just very crude. And then you just like I don't know what happened, but then I see stuff that you post now, and I'm like, that's really great. Like, whatever you did, keep doing that thing, because you are the reason why we contribute towards this stuff, is because you're taking it in a direction that is the kind of stuff that I like to see, and I do
Yeah.
like that
And
investment.
there is, I mean, a lot of people have asked me to, look at their work and kind of critique and give them pointers on where they could improve, where they can make adjustments with, like, and then I'll give them some tips on what to do. And it's really, really gratifying to the next time you see them to see that they've applied that and see that improvement in their work. And it's like, man, I really appreciate that. I really appreciate that. And even though it might be, uh, seem a little bit backwards, that, you know, why would I appreciate somebody uh, applying what I said to them? Because it's, you were serious when you asked me, and you're showing me that you're serious. Not just showing me, but I'm seeing that you're serious about what you're doing. And that makes me want to contribute that much more. Um, but going back to something that you mentioned before about the axe handle trapper and your hesitation to, you know, just make your own or whatever, that's another part of this that this culture that makes me more open to kind of sharing everything, is that mutual respect that we have amongst each other, and that kind of thing where there's like an unwritten rule where if you want to make somebody's pattern, you have to ask them and they have to give you permission to do it. And if somebody doesn't do that, they get their ass chewed out. And I've seen that happen multiple times. Or, if somebody, but so like that makes it a culture where it keeps that kind of cycle going of being open to sharing your knowledge, but also having uh, your creativity respected, and uh, your ideas, still maintaining some ownership over that, and that comes from uh, outside of yourself, where somebody could just take it and run with it, but they still have the respect to let you keep that for yourself because it's kind of your thing. You know what I mean? Um, and it breeds that. It breeds that willingness to share, that openness, and all it does is help the industry. There's, you know, uh, that, and I mean, I don't know, it doesn't feel competitive. Like I, I'm not out to be the greatest knife maker. You know what I mean? I'm out, in the world. I'm out to be the greatest knife maker that I could ever be. Wherever the chips lay, when however let the chips uh fall where whatever that
Fall where they
saying is.
may.
My brain is fried. Yes. Wherever I end up down that path, my goal is to make the best knife that I could possibly make. If I share some knowledge with somebody and they blow past me, I'm happy to see it. I want to see it. You know what I mean? Because that's somebody pushing this art uh, further and going with it and running with it. And that's a good thing. I can't get, my, I can't let my ego be bruised because I see somebody better than me. I know I'm not, I'll never be the greatest knife maker in the world. I'm not, there's been better knife makers before me and there will be after me. I just need to be the best knife maker that I can be. Well, that's my goal. Not everybody wants to do that. It's just I'm half crazy, so
Yeah.
I go for it.
Yeah.
But
Well, we have some puppies. An unfortunate series of events led to us having 10 pit bull puppies a little over a year ago. And we got rid of all of them except for three. And I guess they're permanent fixtures in our house now, apparently.
yep.
So I have learned from my wife. And, something that is um, a little bit irritating about them is that when I feed them, sometimes they're more interested in what's in their neighbor's bowl, and
Yep.
sometimes to the point where they almost start fighting and they hate each other, right? And um, what's more analogous about like a craft than you're more concerned about what's in your neighbor's bowl than
Hmm.
the plenty that you have in your own, and then you get into disagreements and things. It's age old inside of most crafts. It's possible and it has happened multiple times inside of knives. And I'd really like to like avoid that because I really hate those dogs when they fight. Like it irritates the
Yeah.
piss out of me, and I do a lot of things to try to keep that stuff from happening. I want harmony, and uh, you know, speaking of like inspiration, I went and did at my own personal expense because of the research and anecdotal evidence I had. I went through and bought a bunch of the knife guides back into the 80s. I think I did every 5 years from 1985 or something somewhere around there up to the 2000s, right? Fairly recently. And what you can see from the data as in what comes out in print, is that probably the same 5 to 6 knife makers for 20 years has been the only ones to proliferate slip joints in the industry, right? And you see
Mm.
some come up, and then another year they just knock off. And I mean, of course, I'm using 5 year increments because it's like super expensive to buy all of them and to find them. But um, you have some knife makers that come up and then they kind of fall off, and you never see them again. I tried to do research around them; they just don't exist, right? And but the
Hmm.
same staples like Tony Bowes, Bill Ruppel, a few other guys. It's Shadley, a few of them are staples in making, and I can guarantee because of everything that I've seen that they're writing books, they're taking on proteges, they're sharing their knowledge freely, they're using social media as the mechanism to share their stuff, blade forums, everything like that. And now because of that investment, now because of that um, attention to being free with information, they can kind of rest on their laurels, knowing that the next generation of knife makers is going to be able to carry this craft on. And there
Yep.
was you're right, it was a dying art. There was like not that many people that really cared that much about their grandfather's knife form, right? But now you have makers like you that are making it sexy, right? They're bringing back the slip joint and doing things that are different, and it's broadening the horizons of the art form and that specific artistic constraint in slip joints of all things, right? And to me, it wouldn't happen if you didn't care a little less about yourself and a little more about the thing that you're trying to do. That's where I hope like the Knife Makers Guild can correct, course correct, and to think more about like what that legacy is going to look like for the next generation, because we can't really
Mhm.
worry so much about ourselves anymore. Like our time is coming and it's going to pass quicker than we think. We have to look towards the future. Whether the adage is like um, it's something like the like if I think about it, like I can't remember what the actual words are, but it's like the man who plants a seed for the tree that he'll never enjoy its shade of. Like those are the kind of people that you want to be. Like to look at the seeds that you plant for the next people, the next to enjoy the shade of. That's
Mhm.
looking at things in a cyclical but healthy way, where you're investing in the future and you're propagating the seeds of future generations. And we will never know, even in the context of like us talking, you never probably had any context that you're an inspiration to me in my early knife making journey. But you have been, and you shared a lot of knowledge through your experiences just on social media, and we will never know, 4, 5, 6 generations of knife makers down the road how much we affect them. But if we focus on the fact that it is worth investing in, to me, that is a beautiful part of knife making, and I would like to spend my life being able to propagate that for other people too.
Yeah. I mean, it's it still kind of shocks me every time that somebody says that, oh, I saw these old videos that you put up or that you were in that inspired me. I'm just like, oh God, that's so weird. That's so weird to me. But um, it's inspiring too. And it really makes me happy to know that I have played like a little part in some guys' work that I look at now and I'm like, damn, that's so cool what they're doing. Like I love their work. Um, and I love seeing them grow and keep pushing it and the just, focusing on details and quality and coming up with their own new stuff. Like uh Nick Timpson, Birdvis Knives. One of the first times I spoke to him, he's like, "Man, your videos and your tutorials back in the day inspired me." And I'm like, "Oh my God." And just it's really cool, and it's really cool to know that just that little bit that I threw out there impacted somebody, and uh, is keeping this going.
Yeah. Well, I mean, humbly, I'm just a dipshit, right? Like
I mean, aren't
yeah,
we all in the end?
your effort is totally wasted on me. Like you totally didn't reach me that much, because I mean, like whatever. I'm not even the first person that's created a knife podcast that's interviewing you to talk about your inspiration. Jason Ritchie did that. So, how derivative are we? I mean, this is like the wheels of time just keep turning, right? But even still, I mean, the point needs to be made. It's like you'll never know. You'll never know the inspiration that you are to other people. Is in that positive. Like if you keep it positive and you just pay it forward, you'll never know.
It's so
Yeah,
important. It's so important. And even, this conversation could, influence somebody to start sharing their knowledge and impact somebody else and pay that forward and keep it going. It's crucial to what we do. It's crucial.
yeah. Well, kind of on that note, I think that that's actually a good stopping point. I've
Yeah.
uh, I've appreciated all the time that you've spent. I didn't really know that we'd be able to talk this long, mostly because of your schedule, and you got a whole life that you're invested in. It's not knives either. You got your wife and kids, right? But
Well, I told him I was done for the night. So.
like, I'm done with you kids. Yeah. Well, but
Right. Go to bed. I gotta be I'm gonna be in a long conversation. I can
yeah,
already
right.
tell.
But yeah, I when I started doing this stuff, it was really just, man, it really killed me. I didn't get to meet A.G. Russell, even though I could have, and I didn't have the balls to talk to Tony bows, even though I could have. And then I thought, like all these knife makers that are just, maybe in their yesteryears or whatever, they've lived with imposter syndrome so long that as they get older, it starts to be a confirmation bias. And I'm like, I want to talk to them and just get this soundbite out into the ether, so that way there's some reference to them. Because you think of Steve Johnson, you see his work everywhere, but even me, like I saw his work so much before I ever knew him. And I was like, dude, if this happens to me, imagine other people that are like, don't even know what a Loveless pattern is, right? The Bill Rupels of the world, the Bob Terzuolas. Yes, there's things out there of them, the little remnants of past interviews or things of that nature, but there's just not a lot that you really digs into, like if you could like summarize what it is that you're trying to do and what made you create things, like, what is that? I'm interested. And that's kind of turned into a really weird, I don't know where this thing is going, but I kind of enjoy the ride. And I don't know, how long that'll be interesting to people, but it seems to be. And I only do it because it's interesting to me. That's why I spend the time and energy. So maybe the summation of my life in knives will be that this trumps what I'm making, right? But this is like a thing that I'm making in knives.
You are making this, and it is valuable, and um, it's really cool, and I really appreciate the conversation, man. I don't know if I would have volunteered a peek into my soul of why I do this out of the blue. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Um, and yeah, it is really cool. I think about this stuff, and I talk to other people about it, and like hearing a conversation like this with Tony would have been awesome. You know, not just for me, but I think for everybody that's into this stuff. And I think that uh, you doing this is great. I
Yeah. Well,
appreciate
no,
that.
I appreciate you, man. It does not go unnoticed. Anytime anybody comes on here and invests their time with me, because I do recognize that it's something that you'll never get back. But I hope that this is a snapshot in time of that. And obviously, any other time you want to come on the show, you're more than welcome to. But I also vampired a decent amount of time out of your life that you were not probably accounting for. So, I kind of with that being said, thank you very much for being on the show. It's an absolute
Absolutely, man.
pleasure. I will not be in Atlanta, but I'll probably see you to turnaround
Oh
time in
man,
Texas. And I'll always be a fly on the wall, checking out your stuff and cheering you on. So I'm a humongous fan, and I really do appreciate everything that you bring to the industry.
thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, man. Stay in touch.
You too. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Good Old Blades podcast. Remember that you are loved, and God bless.